Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
One Piece Straw Hat Family by Hotspot the 626th. As the crew travels through the Grand Line, something happens that not even the crew could prepare for. A baby? What are the Straw Hats going to do? Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios!
We returned to where we last left off for the Straw Hats. Not much had changed for the group. They were still trapped in a cage made of sea stone. The group had started trying to break the cage. At least, the ones that would not be affected by the sea stone. In doing so, certain attacks managed to slip through the bars and attack some of the gang members. Not like they cared. But unfortunately, none of their attacks even scratched the bars. "Come on," shouted Nami, feeling determined. "Keep trying." Sanji launched another powerful kick at the bars. Unfortunately, like always, it barely did anything. "I'm sorry, Nami," he apologized, "I'm trying the best I can." Frankie threw another punch at the bars. Again, they did not even bend. He began growling with annoyance. "This is not super. Lil sis is still out there alone." "That's why we gotta keep trying," Nami stated. Luffy roared furiously and charged with his fist cocked back. He slammed his fist into the bars with all his strength. Unfortunately, not only did it not work, but Luffy was quickly drained of all his energy as well. With all his energy gone, Luffy slid down onto his face. Quickly, Chopper and Brook pulled Luffy away from the bars. Brook commented to Luffy politely, "Nice try, Mr. Luffy." "Hey," shouted the boss, having finally gotten fed up with the racket. "Enough with the trying to escape shtick. You're never gonna get out." "Shut it," shouted all the Straw Hats together. Their fury fused together, creating an intense aura. The entirety of the boss's gang stepped back frightened. To the boss and all his men, they saw that aura take on the form a lion. A very angry and furious lion. They were starting to believe that the cage was the only thing keeping them safe at the moment. Now, they hoped the Marines would get here sooner. "Where are those Marines?" whispered the boss to his men. Suddenly, there came a thud and cough from behind the gang. The boss and his members turned around to find the man the boss said beaten, barely conscious, and tied up. The gang members gasped in surprise. Even the Straw Hats went quiet, trying to see what was happening. "There," said the man, speaking weakly with the last bit of his consciousness. "Here." He then fell into unconsciousness. "What?" shouted the boss, confused. A figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Smoker, and he was all by himself. Everyone gasped in shock. "Smokey," Luffy said, stunned. "What is the meaning of this?" shouted the boss, stepping forward. Smoker frowned. "You all are under arrest," he stated seriously. "What?" shouted the boss, shocked. "On what charges?" "For kidnapping," Smoker said as his hand and arms began turning into white smoke. "Mental abuse of a child, and disturbing the peace." "What?" shouted the boss again. "White out," shouted Smoker as the smoke launched out. The boss and his gang were completely helpless as the smoke enveloped them. Many tried to move, thinking that this was just normal smoke, only to find that it was far from normal. No one could move one way or the other, like they were being held in place. "White in," Smoker said calmly. "This move is made up." By Smoker's command, the smoke grabbed the gang members and pulled them towards the center. All the gang members screamed as they crashed into each other, with the boss right in the middle. Instantly, the boss was knocked out, soon followed by all his men. Total and complete victory for Smoker. Because the smoke was an extension of Smoker, a logia-type devil fruit user, it did not or could not enter the cage where the Straw Hats stood in. They heard the screams of the gang members and wondered what Smoker had done to them. Then, surprisingly, a jingling sound was made as something came towards the group. Quickly, Nami caught what was thrown at them. She looked at the object in her hand and gasped. "It's the key." "Really?" shouted Usopp, astonished. Quickly, Nami unlocked the door. Everyone exited out of the cage quickly without causing a cluster at the exit. Immediately, most everyone was relieved to be out and free except the group's main fighters. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji. All three of them stood in front of group. Sanji lit a cigarette calmly, though also prepared. Zoro was clutching his swords preparing to strike, and Luffy stood in front of all of them looking the most serious. All three looked at the smoke as it cleared away, revealing Smoker. The Marine Commodore stared back at the group of pirates as the smoke surrounded the group, keeping prying eyes from seeing them. And though the rest of the Straw Hats looked a little worried by their current situation, the monster trio remained focused on Smoker. "Straw Hat," spoke Smoker gruffly. "Yeah," replied Luffy. "If I see that girl again, and she's crying because of your recklessness, I will liberate her from you. Is that clear?" Luffy frowned. He stared back at Smoker, his enemy, as he did to him. Though neither spoke, they both seemed to share a sort of hidden conversation. One that could not be said out loud nor acknowledged by the world. Something completely unheard of, yes. Having gotten his answer and was satisfied with it, Smoker turned around and walked away from the group. As he did, the smoke followed him until he and it disappeared into the forest. Meanwhile, most of the Straw Hats looked at Luffy shocked. What did their captain just say? "Luffy," Nami said, stunned. "What just?" Luffy turned back to Nami, grinning. "Let's go get Mika," he said cheerfully. In the forest, Smoker walked alone, heading towards the last place he left his second-in-command and his squad. For obvious reasons, he left them behind. He did not exactly need them anyway. He soon pulled out a transponder snail and made a call. "Tashigi, I'm done," Smoker said, speaking into the receiver. "Tell Mika to remain where she is in." "Sir," Tashigi shouted suddenly through the snail, surprising the Marine. The snail also conveyed the worry evident in her voice. "What is it?" asked Smoker, remaining calm. "She's gone," shouted Tashigi while the snail conveyed her eyes slightly tearing up. "She took off, I don't know where she went." "What?" shouted Smoker. "Mika versus Akio. Fight, fun, forgive start with the same letter, F." In the forest, Akio walked alone, clutching the medicine bottle he stole. Not too far away was a small house, likely his home. He soon stopped still a distance away from his home. He frowned before he looked at the bottle. He felt a little bad for taking this, and his mother had always told him that stealing was wrong, but he knew his mother could not wait for him to get more money for the medicine legally. So, he put up a fake smile. He would not let his mother know anything about what he did today. He then took his first step forward, readying to put on his act. "Got ya?" Akio stopped and turned around as he heard a familiar voice speak towards him. He gasped as he saw the last person he expected to see, Mika. Young Mika was not happy to see Akio again, but she was also glad at the same time. She had sat with the Marines waiting for some news from Uncle Smokey. She was still emotional, so everyone gave her some needed space. While she waited for Smoker's return, Mika amused herself by looking out into the forest, not wanting to really see adults do boring things. It was then that she spotted Akio walking through the woods not too far away. She at first wanted to tell Auntie Tashi, for the sake of getting revenge. But then she had realized, she wanted to go and kick Akio's butt. It was the first time she ever felt like he had to pay for tricking her. So, she snuck off and caught up with Akio. And now, she would have her revenge. "Mika," said Akio, shocked. "What are you doing here?" "I'm going to kick your butt, you jerk," Mika shouted before charging in Akio. Despite being shorter than the boy, the girl had some strength behind her. She completely knocked Akio down to the ground, forcing him to drop the medicine bottle. Akio shocked by the sudden tackle, but he would not let some girl bet him up. The two began to wrestle towards the house. Both of them soon slammed into the house just underneath a window before moving away, continuing to wrestle. A light turned on inside the home, but neither of the kids noticed. They were too busy fighting. "Meanie!" shouted Mika before biting Akio's arm. "Ouch!" shouted Akio in pain. In retaliation, he began pulling on Mika's hair. He shouted, "Crazy brat! Stupid boy! Cootie catcher! Snot eater! Stupid girl!" Children! Suddenly, there came a new shout, not from the children. It was Yuka, and she looked completely shocked seeing the children fighting. She immediately rushed to stop the kids, but stopped suddenly. She dropped down onto her knees as she began coughing. It was not normal coughing, but hard and painful coughing. As if she would cough out her lungs at any moment. She was even beginning to sweat. It became nearly impossible for her to breathe normally. Hearing the coughing, both children stopped their fighting. "Mom, shouted Akio, beginning to panic. Immediately, he pushed Mika off himself and stood up. He began looking around, saying to himself, panicking, "The medicine? Where's the medicine?" Mika recovered quickly and looked at the boy angrily. Though she wanted to continue fighting, she heard Yuka's hard coughing and looked over at the woman, surprised. "Miss Yuka?" she spoke, worried. When the woman could not reply due to coughing, Mika became worried. She stood up and ran over to Akio, who was searching in some bushes. "What are we looking for?" she asked to Akio, completely forgetting their earlier spout. "A medicine bottle," Akio said quickly before continuing his search. "Okay," Mika said after nodding. She took a quick look around from her spot. She stopped as she spotted something underneath a bush opposite them. Quickly, she went to look at the object and discovered the medicine bottle. "I got it," she shouted, holding the bottle up. Akio stopped and looked over at Mika. "Yes," he said, and quickly ran over and took the bottle. He then rushed over to his move and opened to the bottle. Seeing this, Mika gasped in shock. "You can open those lids?" Akio ignored the girl's comment. He continued on as he took out 2 pills and gave them to his mother. "Here, Mom," he said urgently, "I got the medicine you need." Yuka continued to cough, but she also looked at her son, seeing the medicine in his hand. She took the pills and ate them quickly. She chewed for a quick second, pausing just for a moment, and then swallowed the medicine. She began coughing again, but it was not as bad as earlier. Soon, she was able to breathe normally. "Thank you," Yuka breathed out, and in Akio, she finished smiling. Akio smiled, relieved. Mika shared the same relieved smile, seeing that the nice lady was okay. Now that she was okay, Yuka began frowning towards the 2 children. "What were you 2 doing?" she said, scolding the 2 children, "wrestling around like that. You both could have gotten seriously hurt." Akio's smile changed to a frown. You see," Mika quickly interrupted as she pointed at Akio and shouted angrily, "because he's a big jerk, jerky jerk, jerk." Akio gasped, looking worried. Hey, Mika," Yuka said, surprised, "why did you say that?" "Because," Mika shouted angrily as her eyes began to tearing up, "he tricked me into getting captured." "What?" Yuka said, confused. "And then he lied to my family and got them captured by a bunch of big meanies because they wanted to rescue." "What?" Yuka said, now shocked. She then looked over to her son, confused and angry. "Young man, what is the meaning of this? Why would you?" "They were pirates," Akio shouted, nearly in tears himself. "They were the Straw Hat Pirates. They have a huge bounty. I did it so I could get some money for the medicine." "You took my family away," shouted Mika angrily, even louder as her tears began to fall. "I was trying to help my mom get better," Akio shouted back, even louder and just as angry. Both kids were face to face with each other. They were both fuming with anger, ready to attack each other. Immediately, the adult took action. "Stop it, both of you!" Yuka quickly intervened as she separated the children before a fight could break out. Now, she was in between both children with her arms stretched out. With neither child making a move, the sickly woman spoke to the young girl first. "Mika," Yuka said calmly, "tell me the truth, is your family pirates?" "Yes," Mika answered as she wiped her tears. "But they didn't do anything wrong, they just wanted to have a marriage celebration thingy. They shouldn't be thrown in jail." "But they're pirates," shouted Akio, "that makes them bad guys." Mika growled and tried to attack Akio, but Yuka stopped her. She then shouted, "They're not bad." "Children, please calm down," Yuka said, though mostly talking to Mika. Eventually, Mika calmed down a little and Yuka could continue talking with them. She then looked over at her son, frowning. She asked, "Akio, did you really buy that medicine?" Akio opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His mother was giving him that look, the one which said, "You will tell me the truth because I'll know when you're lying." Akio had absolutely no choice but to tell the truth. "No," he answered honestly before continuing, "there wasn't enough money, so I took the medicine." "Akio," said Yuka, disappointed, "but I left the money," Akio added quickly as some way to save him from disappointing his mother. Yuka remained quiet, though remaining between the children. She thought deeply over their situation. She was not sure what to say to either child. "Mika!" A voice echoed through the forest, calling out for the little girl. Immediately, Mika recognized who the voice it was. "Mama," Mika said, hopeful. "Mika, this time, It was another familiar voice. Daddy. Mika walked away from Yuka and Akio and towards the forest. That time, the call sounded closer. Mika, Mika, Mika Heim, Lil, Sis, Mika-chan. Mika soon heard the voice of many others. She recognized each one. Zoro, Usopp, Sanji, Frankie, and Brooke. They sounded spread out in the forest, but they all sounded close by. Her thoughts of revenge and anger towards Akio soon evaporated into happiness and joy. Her family were free, and looking for her. Without a moment's hesitation, she took off to go find them, leaving Yuka and Akio behind completely confused. Mom, Akio said as he tugged his mother's shirt sleeve, let's get out of here. Yuka shook her head. No, Akio, she said as she stood up, we are going to meet with Mika's family, officially. Akio gulped nervously. Mika, shouted Nami as she walked around the forest searching. The whole crew followed Nami and Chopper, who was trying to follow Mika's scent, through the forest. They all shouted and searched through the forest, keeping an eye out for the little girl. They were all a little worried. They had figured they would run into the Marines soon, since Mika had gotten one of them to actually help them. If it were a trap or not, they did not know. They kept together in case they were to be ambushed by the Marines. Nevertheless, they kept searching and calling out for Mika. Mika, shouted Luffy. Usopp walked up to Chopper looking optimistic. Do you still have her scent, Chopper? Yeah, Chopper said, keeping his nose to the ground. It's still fresh. Sanji clenched his teeth in anger, nearly ruining his cigarette. How far did those bastards chase our poor princess? He asked rhetorically. If that Marine didn't take all of them away. Just focus on finding her, dartboard. Zoro responded gruffly. Surprisingly, Sanji did not respond back with an insult. He took it with a grain of salt, as it was important to find Mika above a petty rivalry. So, he continued searching. Mika, shouted Luffy and Nami together, Mama. Nami and everyone stopped as they all heard the call. Daddy, the same voice spoke out again, getting closer. They all immediately recognized the voice. Mika, shouted Luffy happily. Daddy, replied the voice cheerfully. Mika, Shodel. Mama, replied the voice again, now closer. Mika, shouted the rest of the crew together excitedly. Luffy and Nami immediately took off, running forward. It did not take them more than a few feet away as Mika ran right into their view. Parents and child were soon reunited as Mika ran right into Luffy and Nami's, embracing huge. Mama, Daddy, Mika shouted as she hugged her parents. Mika, Luffy and Nami replied back, holding the girl close. Yes, shouted Usopp, throwing his fists into the air in cheer. We found her. Robin smiled, relieved and happy. Thank goodness. Super, shouted Frankie as he posed, showing off his cheer. Yo-ho-ho-ho, cried out Brooke, overjoyed as she hugged her parents. Mika looked up at them. She was shedding tears and looking worried and panicked. I'm so sorry, she shouted for her whole family to hear. I didn't know it was a trap. I'm sorry I had to go to Uncle Smokey for help, I'm. Enough, Mika. Nami said as she silenced her little girl, gently stroking her head. Everything is okay. Don't worry, we're all here and safe. You did really good, Mika, Luffy said, grinning proudly. The young girl stared up at her parents, surprised. Despite her parents' comforting words, Mika could not help but cry more, though now with joy and relief. She nestled into her parents' chests, keeping them as close as she could get them. She was just so happy to have them, and the rest of the crew, back with her. The crew looked on at the family happily. Even Zoro, who often refrained from being soft, was smiling contentedly. Suddenly, the crew picked up some sounds of someone coming towards them. Immediately, everyone looked over and prepared to fight should it be a Marine. Much to their surprise, it was a woman, Yuka, dragging her son, Akio, with her. Both groups were surprised to find the other so suddenly. Hey, shouted Usopp angrily. It's that brat, Akio gasped before hiding behind his mother, afraid. Wait, Nami said as she stood up, recognizing the woman. You're. Please, Yuka spoke out loudly before she lowered down onto her knees. She then placed her hands forward in front of her and bowed towards the Straw Hats. She then spoke aloud for them to hear. Please forgive my son. Mom, Akio, Yuka said as she momentarily lifted her head up towards her son. She gave the boy a stern look that told him to stop and listen to her. She spoke to him softly, please, apologize. The young boy looked conflicted at his mother, but in the end, he listened. Akio bowed down like his mother did. "I'm sorry," he said towards the group. Immediately, Yuka went back bowing. "Please forgive my son. I know what he did was awful, but he's just a child. He was only doing what he thought was right for me. If he must be punished, please let me take it in his place." None of the Straw Hats spoke. How could they? The woman had practically poured her heart out to protect her only son. All their anger towards the boy had gone away the moment she bowed down towards them. An action that initially shocked the crew. She had come here of her own volition, bringing her son to apologize to a potentially dangerous pirate crew. But this was not some coward's apology. It was a brave mother protecting her child the best way she could. She may be afraid, but would fight them just to protect her son. Usopp began to scratch the back of his head, feeling awkward. "Well," he said before turning around, placing both his hands behind his head, "he is just a kid." Brook nodded in agreement. "Yes. A child's parent is the only one who may rightly punish their child." Yuka looked up. She wore a look of surprise hearing the group had to say. "I don't know what you thought," Luffy said to Yuka sitting on the ground before rubbing the top of Mika's head affectionately, "but we just wanted to get Mika back." Mika smiled, enjoying the affection her father gave her. When he stopped, she immediately frowned and looked back at Akio. She was still angry at him. "No," she shouted stubbornly and pointed at the boy. "He should be punished, kick his butt." Akio quickly sat up and shouted, "No, Mika," Nami scolded, batting the girl's head lightly. "I understand that you're still mad, but everything is fine now. No one but Ms. Yuka will punish Akio." "But, no buts," Nami stated sternly as she crossed her arms. Mika puffed her cheeks up in anger. She then turned away from her mother, crossing her own arms displeased. "Thank you," Yuka said, smiling towards the pirate group until she began to cough again. It was not as bad as earlier, but it definitely did not sound good. "Mom!" shouted Akio as he stood and rushed over to his mother's side. Immediately, Chopper was concerned. He asked towards the boy, "What's wrong with her?" Akio looked at the reindeer. He immediately overlooked that he was talking to a reindeer and told him, "She's sick." He spoke worried, "That's why I had to trick you all. So, I could buy medicine for her." Chopper nodded before quickly transforming in brainpoint form. He then told the child, "I'm a doctor. May I take a look at her condition?" Akio was a little slow to react at first. The talking and transforming reindeer had nearly thrown him for a loop of excitement and amazement. He however remained mature and spoke up, "You're a doctor?" "Yeah," Mika said, sounding overconfident. "Uncle Chopper can heal anything." "Ah, Mika," Chopper said as he twisted and wiggled with embarrassment. "Just because you say that doesn't mean I like you, jerk." Akio's sweat dropped and looked at the Straw Hat adults. "Is he really a doctor?" "Of course," Robin said, smiling amusedly. Sanji stepped forward, kneeling down towards the sick woman. He extended his hand out, asking with a suave smile, "Will Milady allow our doctor to give her a medical exam?" "Wait," shouted Akio as he pulled out the medicine bottle. "We have medicine for her, see?" Chopper peered at the medicine bottle, reading its label. He gasped seeing it. "Wait, you haven't?" "Yes," shouted Yuka suddenly as she took Sanji's hand and stood up quickly. "I would be happy to have your doctor to examine me." She then took the medicine bottle out of Akio's hand gently. She saw Akio's confused expression and quickly responded, "I'm just giving this to Dr. Chopper, sweetie. To make sure he doesn't give me something I'm not already on." Akio frowned, still confused, but nodded. Sanji kept up his smile, though he clearly understood something was off. Nevertheless, he escorted the woman like a gentleman. "This way, madam." Yuka blushed. "Oh, thank you," she said, surprised by the man's suaveness. Akio stood back, unsure if he should follow the group. Then, he felt a small push from his back. He looked up to see Luffy, next to him and smiling down at him. Akio could not help but find that strange. "Come on, Akio," Luffy said cheerfully before pushing the boy along with him as they followed the group. Nami glanced back, noticing her fiancé staying behind. She smiled, seeing that Luffy had no real hard feelings toward the boy. Something she wished her daughter would learn. Speaking of, she looked down at said daughter who was holding her hand. She could see that Mika too saw Luffy bring along the boy. And surely enough, she looked very angry and probably jealous too. Straw Hats brought the family of 2 back to their ship. Chopper immediately took Yuka to the medical bay while Akio sat outside. To say that the boy was nervous being around the people he tricked was an understatement. While the crew spread out all over ship waiting for the results of Chopper's diagnosis, Akio sat on the bench around the main mast. Most of the Straw Hats did their own thing, completely indifferent to the nervous boy sitting by himself. Though, one was interested in getting the boy to play. "Hey Akio," shouted Luffy as he ran up to the boy with an excited grin, "you wanna play tag with us?" Akio looked up from the grass. He saw that it was not only Luffy but Usopp, Brook, and Mika as well. While the 2 adults seemed fine with Akio joining, Mika of course was far from. Mika shouted unhappily, "He's a jerk." Usopp and Brook looked surprised at Mika. "Wow, we're really seeing a whole new side to Mika today," Usopp commented astonished. "Indeed," Brook said agreeing. "Come on," Luffy said, actually ignoring his daughter. He then leaned in towards Akio and whispered, "We'll let Mika be it." "Hey," shouted Mika, mad, having clearly hurt her father. Akio was intrigued by the man. Despite having tricked him, he was still being nice to him. He found it weird, but he was bored. "Okay," he said as he slipped off the bench, "I'll play, but I don't mind being it." Luffy grinned. "Okay, Akio's it," he shouted out before running. Akio made a small smile and took off after Luffy. The straw hat wearing man led him towards the others, who in turn took off. While the men playing were happily cheering and shouting, Mika was far from happy having Akio join them. Which made things hard as Akio went straight after her, having seen her as the easy target. Though Mika was not trying at first, seeing the boy coming after her soon made her run faster. To Akio's surprise, she was really fast. Not wanting to be outdone, Akio picked up his pace, chased after her. "You're not going to catch me," shouted Mika, antagonizing. Akio smirked confidently as if accepting a challenge. "Yes, I will," he shouted back before picking up speed. Seeing the boy gaining on her, Mika picked up her own speed. She would not be outdone by a boy and a jerk. As Akio chased after Mika, Luffy sat on the edge of the Thousand Sunny watching curiously. The 2 kids had passed him twice without Akio noticing him. So, Luffy watched the 2 chase on with an interested gaze. Kids," Usopp said as he stood on the stairs watching the kids run past him. He shouted out, "There are other players in this game." Frankie took a break tinkering with new hobby, a certain cannon that had yet to be completed, and watched the 2 kids. He lifted his sunglasses up, impressed with the boy. "Ow," he shouted, "that kid has some super energy." Mika soon reached the slide. Being her only way to escape being it, she immediately took it. As she slid down on her belly, she gave out a cheerful "wee" before reaching the bottom. Akio stopped at the top of the slide. He was completely surprised to find one on a pirate ship. "You have a slide?" he asked, amazed. After Mika got up, she turned to the boy, hearing his amazed statement. She gave out a huff as she crossed her arms and smirked arrogantly, saying, "Of course we do. My family is the best pirates ever." Several of the Straw Hats snorted, nearly laughing. It was adorable that Mika was trying to show off in front of the newcomer. Not questioning the girl's infallible logic, Akio soon went down the slide. He shouted, "Yahoo!" as he slid down. He landed right next to Mika, laughing joyfully. Mike frowned, seeing the boy was enjoying himself. To rectify this, she restated snobbishly to the boy, "You're still it." Akio stopped laughing, hearing Mika. He frowned before launching up, trying to tag her. Unfortunately, the little girl easily dodged his hand and he fell flat on his face. "Ha ha," said Mika mockingly and smiling. She then took off running. Akio growled and quickly got back up. He then chased after the girl, still determined to make her it. The Straw Hats sat around the deck as they watched the kids play together. It did not even matter to the others playing that they were being ignored. They watched as she took the boy all over the ship, almost like giving him a tour. She showed him the aquarium. "Wow!" shouted Akio as he spun around, looking at the amazing aquarium room. He could not get enough of it. "Nah ha!" shouted Mika, sticking her tongue out towards Akio. The boy stopped admiring the room and redirected his attention back at the girl. "I'm gonna get you," he shouted as he took off after her. "The library, I've never seen so many books," Akio said, amazed, looking at the shelves of books. Robin was also in the room. She watched the boy amused by his reaction to her room. "You're welcome to read one of them if you like," she said generously. "Oh, Akio said bashfully as he looked down. "I can't read." "Oh," Robin said surprised. "Yeah, I can read," Mika said grinning boastful on the other side of the room. "Mika," Robin spoke with an amused smile, "your hubris is showing." "Ah!" Mika screamed as she covered her body. Akio snorted with laughter. He covered his mouth trying to hide his amusement. Robin was doing the same though much more subtle. And everywhere in between on the Thousand Sunny. With each new room Akio was astounded by what he saw. He never knew pirates had such cool stuff. And Mika, she was beginning to quickly warming up to the boy. Even actually having fun instead of acting out her frustrations. After an hour, both kids laid on the deck breathing heavily and smiling. They had run all over the Sunny seeing what it had to offer. From the soldier dock system to the Usopp's workshop to even the living quarters. Their game of tag had become less of a game and more about exploration and discovery. It was probably one of the greatest days of their young lives. "Hey, Mika," Akio spoke having recovered enough to speak. "Yeah, I'm sorry, it's okay, you did it to help your mom," Mika said smiling brightly. "And I'm sorry for being mad at you for a while." "And attacking me? No, you deserved that." Akio's sweat dropped. "Okay, fair enough." She, laughed Mika happily. Akio could not help but laugh along with her. He was just as happy as Mika. Though these kids had started out less than friends, now they were probably the best of friends, or close to it. During the whole moment, the Straw Hats watched them looking both proud and happy, especially Nami. They were all happy to see Mika's animosity fade away and the spunky and playful girl returned. Nami did not want her daughter to hold on to hate like she did some years before. It was good for her to make a friend, even if they would have leave eventually. But for now, they could be happy. It seemed like hours for Yuka, but it was only just a few minutes after she had heard the news from Dr. Chopper. She stayed seated on the bed as she processed the information. At first, she could not believe the young doctor. There was no way it could be accurate. You can't be serious," still frowning sadly, Chopper shook his head. "I'm sorry," he spoke, "but the results don't lie. You only have 3 days to live." "That can't be true," Yuka said, her voice raising slightly. "I've been to the local doctor several times. He said I was fine." "It's a very particular disease you have," Chopper stated sadly. "The symptoms can be treated for a while, but they can't cure the initial disease." "Isn't there anything you can do?" Yuka asked, pleading softly. Chopper frowned. "I could whip up something that could give you a little bit more time, but any strenuous work will completely undo it. All I can recommend is to not place any more stress on yourself and relax. It may just aggravate it further." "Relax," Yuka said loudly in a sudden moment of anger that frightened the young doctor. Despite looking angry, she was also shedding tears. Her emotions were running wild. "How can I be relaxed knowing I'm going to die, leaving my son all on his own in this world? How can I relax at all?" "Ms. Yuka," Chopper shouted, trying to calm the hysterical woman down. Though still angry, Yuka immediately went silent. Being caught off guard by the reindeer's shout, it gave the young woman a moment of clarity. Suddenly, her anger evaporated and was replaced with regret and sadness. "I'm sorry," Yuka said as she recoiled from her own behavior and began to cry. "I'm so sorry." Chopper did not say anything. He was not at all mad of the woman. He understood that she was in grieving and it was typical for one to get angry. Since she had apologized, it meant that her mind had come to terms with her condition. At least, somewhat. Now came the difficult part for Chopper. "Ms. Yuka," Chopper spoke calmly, "is there anyone I can inform? Like family or friends?" Yuka did not say a thing. She only shook her head no. Chopper gulped, looking even worse. What will happen to Akio then? He thought worriedly. With Yuka not having any family or friends to speak of, Chopper bravely decided on another option. "May I?" he said, stopping for a moment, feeling nervous before forcing his question through. "May I inform my crew?" Not to his surprise, Yuka could not respond. She was continued to cry. Chopper frowned sadly. Since Yuka could not clearly respond, he decided to inform his crew anyway. Someone has to know, he reasoned to himself. The reindeer then slipped off his chair and proceeded to walk out of the room, doing so quietly as to give the woman her moment. Now, He had the hard duty to tell the others the bad news. Now outside, Chopper looked out to see that everyone was out on the deck and that all the crew was looking over at Mika and Akio, both laying on the grass laughing. If he was not feeling conflicted before, he was really feeling it now. What am I going to do? He thought worriedly. While nearly everyone was distracted by the two kids playing, Nami had taken a moment to look up towards Medical Bay to see if Chopper was done. To her surprise, Chopper was already out and looking down at the group. Chop! Nami was about to call to the reindeer, but then, she noticed his expression mixed sadness, nervousness, and completely conflicted. Immediately, she understood that something was wrong. Unfortunately, her short blurb had attracted everyone's attention. "Hey, Chopper!" Luffy shouted cheerfully. "You done already? Did you help Ms. Yuka?" Chopper gasped, caught completely by surprise. "Wait, Luffy," Nami said, trying to calm her lover down. Hearing the pirate captain, Akio and Mika sat up. The young boy looked up towards the doctor and stood up looking hopeful. "Is my mom okay?" he asked curiously. "Of course she is," Mika stated enthusiastically as she stood up. "Uncle Chopper is the best doctor ever." "Mika," Nami said, too late to stop her. Chopper gulped nervously. His situation was starting to get worse by the second. "What's up, Chopper?" asked Sanji, interestingly noticing the nervous expression on the doctor's face. "Give us the super news, Gorilla Reindeer," shouted Frankie, enthusiastic. "Yes," Brook said politely. "Please tell us." "Yeah," Usopp said, cheering optimistically. If Chopper was not feeling bad earlier, he was sure feeling it now. Chopper frowned as he could not bring himself to speak again. What could he say to everyone, especially with the children here? Luckily, one of the more observant members picked up on Chopper's worries. Robin turned to the kids and spoke. "Mika, Akio, how about we head over to the library?" "Huh?" said the children, confused. "Why?" Mika asked curiously. "A number of reasons actually," Robin said, smiling. "You see, there are certain things that only adults should hear first when it comes to medical practices. Usually just advice. I thought, since you two wouldn't want to hear boring adult stuff, I would show you this new book I bought. It is very interesting." Mika immediately bought Robin's statement. She smiled and nodded eagerly. "Okay." Akio said, not completely sure if he actually wanted to join them, but Mom. "Come on, Akio," Mika said before taking his arm and pulling. "Auntie Robin has the best storybooks." Akio was completely unable to argue back before Mika began pulling towards the library. Robin followed behind them, amused by her little niece's enthusiasm. She was also thankful for it since it was able to remove the children from this potentially touchy situation. "Oi!" shouted Sanji towards Akio, irritated. "You better keep your hands to yourself." Usopp gave Sanji a light backhand to his arm as if trying to knock some sense into him. "He's too young for that stuff, Sanji." When the Robin and the children were gone, Usopp decided to ask a question. So, why is it the kids needed to leave?" Zoro answered, "Because Chopper has something to say." "Huh?" said Luffy before looking over at Chopper. "Well, of course he does. He's going to tell us that Ms. Yuka is fine, right?" Chopper remained silent, frowning. In response, the rest of the crew went silent. Those who were originally optimistic had lost their optimism. They were all beginning to realize that what Chopper had to say was anything but good. Many of them were shocked, but oddly, Luffy looked so the most. "Chopper," Luffy said, "tell us." The young reindeer nodded. "It's not good, guys." It was now nighttime, and everyone aboard the Thousand Sunny seemed to be asleep. Still in the medical room, Yuka had fallen asleep and left there out of courtesy. Despite looking peaceful sleeping, the poor woman clearly had sadness etched on her face. It is most likely that she had cried herself to sleep. But now, she was beginning to wake up. Yuka woke up peacefully. She was slightly disorientated as she sat up on the bed. As her head cleared and her mind began working properly, she was confused as to where she was. It then dawned upon her that she was still in Chopper's medical room. Immediately after realizing this, Yuka remembered the terrible news she received. "I'm dying," Yuka frowned, recalling this painful fact. She decided she no longer wanted to sleep. She left the medical room and began taking a stroll around the deck. As she walked, she marveled at what a beautiful night it was this night. She followed along the edge of the Sunny, keeping to the side facing the ocean. The full moon's light was glistening off the calm ocean. Despite her own situation, Yuka could not help but smile seeing this beautiful sight. It reminded her of better times in her short life. The young, sick woman kept walking, going down the stairs, and onto the grass deck. She noticed that there was something on the deck. Her curiosity brought her over to the object to find that it was white-painted, wood canopy. Yuka wondered why this was here. It seemed completely out of planted to have a marriage celebration thingy. Yuka recalled what Mika had said earlier. She was then able to put two and two together. A wedding canopy, she said surprised. As she looked at the well-made canopy, she began to smile with nostalgia. While Yuka stood before the canopy, a door began to open. Nami quietly exited hers and Luffy's room. She then walked out and leaned into the banister breathing out a sigh. She looked to have went through an ordeal. When she looked out towards the deck she spotted Yuka in front of the canopy. Immediately, she was curious. "Ms. Yuka?" Yuka gasped hearing someone speak. She turned around and spotted Nami. "Oh, Nami," she said surprised. "I thought everyone was asleep?" "For the most part," Nami said as she began to walk down towards Yuka. "I've had rough night talking with Luffy." "Is something wrong?" Nami said sounding slightly hesitant. "He's just had a bad memory," she said frowning. "This situation hasn't been good for everyone." Yuka immediately began to worry. What about Akio? Neither he or Mika know. Yuka was a little relieved to hear this. She did not want her son to be sad just yet. Not after he was finally beginning to enjoy himself with a new friend. "Where are they?" she asked. "Mika has a room below deck." A momentary pause as we check in on the two tykes. Like most everyone on the Sunny, they were asleep. However, nearly everyone but Luffy and Robin were sleeping with them. At some point, Mika had gotten nearly everyone to join her and Akio for a sleepover. The men laid all around the room in odd sleeping positions, sleeping peacefully. Most of them were snoring as well. Oddly, no one was actually using the bed. In the middle of this, Mika and Akio were both sleeping on the floor, with blankets and pillows, sprawled out. Mika was snoring peacefully with her hand smashing into Akio's face. Surprisingly, the boy seemed to be sleeping peacefully despite his new friend's sleeping position. "Having a sleepover with the rest of the crew," Nami said with exasperated sigh. Yuka gasped a little with surprise, but smiled seeing how friendly this band of rogues was being. Her attention then returned back to the canopy and her thoughts of a wedding. She looked back at Nami wearing a curious look. "So," she said, "who is it getting married?" Nami looked a little nervous, but she replied, "It's mine and Luffy's. We were going to have it today but," Nami flashed an awkward smile, "you know." "I'm terribly sorry," Yuka said apologetic. "It's okay," Nami said now smiling appreciative of the apology. "Whoever heard of pirates getting married anyways?" "Now don't say that," Yuka said before smiling supportively. "Everyone has the right to be happy however they may find it. If you want to have this wedding, and everything is ready, you should do it immediately." Nami looked at the older woman surprised. "But Ms. Yuka, my situation is bad," Yuka said placing her hand gently on Nami's shoulder, "but that shouldn't ruin your happy day." While Nami did have her concerns over Yuka's suggestion, but in seeing how strongly Yuka was supporting her she had to agree. "All right," she said smiling, "we'll have the wedding in the morning." Yuka smiled and nodded in agreement. "Good. I look forward to seeing you in a beautiful wedding dress and getting married." Nami giggled, enjoyed the attention from the older mother. "Yeah, though you'll have to do without a wedding dress." "Oh," Yuka said surprised. "I couldn't find a dress before the Marines chased us out of town. I do have some other nice clothes though. Should be fine, right?" Despite Nami's carefree attitude, Yuka still looked concerned. It was not as if she did not agree with her, but she felt a little sad that this beautiful, young woman could not look her best even for a small wedding. "Just like ours, Daisuke," she thought fondly to herself. In remembering these memories, Yuka realized something important and began smiling. "Ms. Yuka?" asked Nami curious. "My word," Yuka said acting slightly stern towards Nami. "What is a young bride like you doing up this late?" "Huh?" Nami said surprised. Yuka soon began pushing the younger woman back towards her room. "The bride shouldn't be looking tired on her wedding day. You go right back to bed, young ma'am." "What? Off to bed now?" Yuka said as she gave Nami one last, light push towards the stair. Nami said confused before she began walking by herself. Before walking up the stairs, Nami looked back at Yuka still confused despite obeying her. Okay then. Good night, she replied to older woman. Good night. Yuka replied back happily. Though still very confused, Nami returned to her room. Once the door was closed, Yuka looked over towards the forest and the island. She wore a determined expression and began walking toward the edge of the Thousand Sunny. She stopped momentarily as she recalled what Chopper had said earlier. All I can recommend is to not place any more stress on yourself and relax. It may just aggravate it further. As she reached the gangplank, she stopped. Recalling that made her hesitant to take another step. They were quite far away from her home. Was it worth the risk? She clenched her fists as she made her decision. She took a step forward onto the gangplank left there by the Straw Hat crew. From there, she walked down the gangplank. She then walked onto the island and then sprinted into the dark forest. Determination was etched into her expression. What was so important that she would risk her health for? In the morning, everyone awoke and met in the dining room for breakfast. Even Yuka, who had returned by morning, was there able to greet her son. She looked a little tired, but her cheerfulness seemed to easily cover anything concerning. Akio was definitely none the wiser to it. Morning, Mom. Akio said happily. Yuka smiled at her son. Good morning, Akio. Morning, Ms. Yuka, Mika said loudly and just as happy with a grin. This time, Yuka reacted with a soft laugh, enjoying the little girl's energy once again. And good morning to you, Mika. How was the sleepover, fellas? Asked Robin, being curious. Yeah, Chopper said cheerfully. It was fun. Usopp rubbed his like it was sore. He then responded, I think I was sleeping on a toy or something. My neck is killing me. Zoro yawned. I slept fine. It was Sanji's turn, and he gave Nami a military salute, looking serious. Mikaheim was safely protected, Nami. Nami rolled her eyes at Sanji. Like her daughter would be in any trouble, but she knew it was the thought that counts. Thanks, Sanji. Ah, thank you, Nami, Sanji said, immediately overjoyed in being complimented. Sanji, shouted Luffy impatiently. Food? Sanji immediately returned to his usual calm demeanor. He responded back, right, before heading into the kitchen to make breakfast. We had a super night, Frankie said with a grin and thumbs up. Yes, though it seemed nearly impossible to get Mika to go to sleep with so many of us with her, Brooke said before laughing lightheartedly. But you're not supposed to go to sleep at sleepovers, Mika stated before pointing. That's what Uncle Usopp said. Akio looked over at Mika dryly. I think that defeats the point of a sleepover. In response, Mika stuck her tongue out at the boy. What do you know? You're not the sleepover king like Uncle Usopp. Yeah, Usopp said proudly, with his ego being boasted by his niece. Chopper also cheered out the same, agreeing with Mika. Akio was not buying it. You do know that he's lying, right? What? Shouted both Mika and Chopper, shocked. Shouldn't you know as an adult? Responded Akio towards the reindeer. Yuka laughed, enjoying the lively atmosphere. She had never experienced company like this before. It was so fun for her. She had never seen her son act this way before, but she was enjoying it. In seeing the older woman looking cheerful, Nami smiled and decided now was a good time to announce something important. Everly thus gaining everyone's attention. I have an announcement to make. Huh? What is it, Nami? Asked Luffy, confused. Today, we're doing the wedding and nothing is going to stop it. Eh? Said nearly the entire group, mostly from the crew, shocked. Akio leaned over to Mika looking confused. What's a wedding? He asked, whispering. Something parents do so that they'll stay together forever, Mika replied, also whispering. Oh, but Nami, spoke up Usopp, sounding nervous, isn't it a bit soon to be doing this? He said this while glancing over at Yuka, who was simply smiling with joy over the announcement. Nami understood what Usopp was trying to say. Nevertheless, she shook her head and responded, no, now is the perfect time. Nami, said Sanji, slightly concerned. I think it's a wonderful idea. A few of the Straw Hats looked shocked as they heard Yuka's voice speak up. The young woman continued smiling and was looking even happier. I would love to see the wedding. Okay, Luffy said, grinning happily. Let's do this then, Captain's orders. Well, if the captain agrees, Robin said, smiling amusedly. No use arguing really, Sanji said, grinning while he cooked. Zoro chuckled and grinned. Well, it had to happen sometime. While little surprised by Yuka's acceptance of this idea, Usopp just let his concerns roll off his shoulders. He smiled as he became joyful. Alright then, let the wedding of Monkey D. Luffy, the future Pirate King, and Nami, eventual drawer of the greatest world map, begin. Yeah, shouted Chopper and Mika together, excited. Super, shouted Frankie, also excited. Yo-ho-ho-ho, excellent, shouted Brook, overjoyed. Mama, Mika spoke, looking up at her mother. She had a very displeased expression as she asked her mother, do I still have to wear a dress? Nami sighed, though still retaining a smile. No, you don't. Yay! Mika cheered with a wide grin. Her shout made every adult laugh. The group soon had breakfast, and once done, everyone got ready for the wedding. For the most part, everything was ready. The only thing missing was for Nami to get dressed up for the occasion. Currently, she and all the women were in hers and Luffy's room. Mika had so bluntly stated she was not interested in being girly, much to the despair of Sanji, and remained with the others. Yuka, however, was a good substitution. In the Luffy and Nami's room, Nami was having Robin help her with preparations. It was not much, just some makeup and a second opinion, but Nami wanted it for better or worse. Yuka sat on the bed providing conversation and her own experience to the preparation. As for her, what she was going to wear, Nami had chosen the one Robin had approved of, her 5th outfit during their adventure on Thriller Bark. Robin soon finished up the little touches to Nami's face. She backed up to get a second look before smiling. There, she said proudly, you look beautiful, Nami. You truly do. Yuka added warmly. Nami took a look at herself in the mirror. Robin did not apply much makeup, but there was an obvious and noticeable differences. Once she liked. After checking side to side, she smiled and looked at her crewmate. Thank you, Robin, she said in gratitude, it's perfect. Even without the wedding dress? Asked Yuka coyly. I don't really need the dress anyway, Nami said, smiling genuinely. This will still be one of the best days of my life. I'm happy that you feel that way, Nami, Yuka said, smiling before standing up. But I feel even if this is a small event that you should still look your best. What are you? Nami spoke as she watched the older woman suddenly pull out a folded white dress. She immediately gasped in surprise. Ms. Yuka. Nami, Yuka spoke, holding out the white dress towards the younger woman. It's a little old, but I want you to have this. Nami looked at Yuka, surprised. What? Go on. Yuka said gently as she continued to hold the dress out. Not wanting to be rude, Nami took the dress. She held up the dress, letting it unfurl down to see it in full, and she was amazed by it. The dress was simple in design, a strapless tulle with a lace applique. There was an elegance to it that was breathtaking. Though Yuka had informed her that it was old and worn, she would have believed that this wedding dress was brand new. She turned around with the dress to view it in perspective in the mirror. Seeing herself and the dress together, she was absolutely speechless. It looks beautiful, Robin commented with a smile. Thank you, Yuka said humbly. Ms. Yuka, Nami said, astonished. It may be a little big, Yuka said as she walked next to Nami, looking at her and the dress in the mirror, but I'm sure I can make fit you. Nami said, but could not. She was so touched by the gesture from the older woman she almost began to cry. She instead smiled and nodded, replying back emotional, thank you. Yuka smiled back. She was happy to have helped. Robin, on the other hand, looked very concerned. Ms. Yuka, she spoke, when did you bring this dress aboard? I went out and brought it here, Yuka said, casual. Nami gasped. Ms. Yuka, please don't worry, Yuka said calmly, I'm fine really. If you say so, Nami said, unsure. I do. Now hold still while I fix this dress. Well then, Robin spoke as she began to leave, I better make sure the groom has his suit. Good idea, Yuka said in agreement. Robin then left the room. She could hear Yuka's plans for Nami as she shut door. It seemed to involve some flowers, something she could approve of. She then headed down to the others on the grass deck. She could see that they were currently in waiting. Hey, Robin, called out Usopp, noticing the woman coming towards them. Is Nami ready yet? When she reached the bottom of the stairs, Robin answered. No, she will need a little more time. Really? How come? Asked Usopp. Ms. Yuka has provided her with a wedding dress. Wow, said Usopp amazed. How nice of her. Akio looked confused. Mom had a wedding dress. What about a dress? Luffy asked curious. Luffy, spoke Robin to her captain smile, you should get your suit on. Ah, do I have to? Robin chuckled. I believe you know the answer to that. Luffy sighed and nodded. Right, I'm going, he said before heading towards the men's quarters. I'll go help him, Sanji said coolly as he followed behind Luffy. As Robin watched the two men go, she felt a tug from her shirt. She looked down and saw Mika holding her shirt. The young girl was looking up at her with curious eyes. She asked, what is it, Mika? Do I still have to be the flower girl? She didn't say otherwise, so I would think so. Ah, man, Mika said before crossing her arms and pouting with disdain. Robin felt a little bad for her little niece. Though she knew the little girl would get over it, she decided on another option. Mika, she spoke softly, would you like to make a compromise? Huh? Luffy was the first one to step out of his room. He was wearing a very nice black suit with a red undershirt and black tie, strong world outfit minus coat, thought still wearing his sandals. He immediately took his place in front of Zoro, soon followed by everyone standing behind him. With the exception of Yuka, who was given a chair to sit on. Everything and everyone were positioned just in front of stairs, making it a rough straight line. Only Brook, who stood to the side ready to play his violin, Mika, who was standing near the stairs close to parents' room, and Sanji, standing by the room, were the only ones not joining them for one reason or another. As he stood attentively, Sanji soon heard the door open. He turned to see Nami, only to be completely caught off guard by her. Nami stepped out of the dark room, revealing all the preparation and time that Robin and Yuka to make her so beautiful. Her white dress fit her body like destiny thanks to Yuka's hard work. The veil that thinly covered her face could not mask the beautiful smile she wore that even outperformed the little mane. Her hands was a bouquet of white lily flowers that looked like the stars themselves. She was more beautiful in this one moment than she had in any moment previous, including when she had once already been in a wedding dress. That moment specifically paled to this. As she stepped out, Nami looked at Sanji, now gaping in amazement, and asked, so, how'd I look? Sanji frankly could barely speak. Every ounce of his being wanted to proclaim his love, a love for all beautiful women, to the heavens themselves and swoop her off her feet. However, as a man, he knew she was not his to take. So instead of his usual act, Sanji smiled warmly as he extended his hand towards, saying, Luffy won't be able to take his eyes off you for a second. While a little surprised by Sanji's calm answer, she did accept his answer with her own smile. She then took his hand and was led down the stairs. At this moment, everyone noticed Nami had finally stepped out. Every last one of the Straw Hats were completely and utterly stunned by Nami. Wow, said Usopp, nearly speechless. Frankie lifted his sunglasses, staring at Nami's stunned, girly looks. Super, Chopper said, finishing Frankie's sentence with amazement. Yeah. Brook even began to cry. Oh, what a beautiful moment, the skeleton said through his tears. To think I would live to see such a lovely moment between two of my crewmates. And to everyone's surprise, he left it at that. This moment was too precious for jokes, even by him. Robin did not say a thing. She was smiling softly, overjoyed by how beautiful the girl was. In a rare show of emotions, she was even shedding a soft tear. Yuka covered her mouth in joy as her own tears of joy flowed more freely than Robin's. Despite having helped with Nami's dress, she found it even more beautiful than just a few minutes ago. And Yuka could not be happier for it. Even Akio, despite being so young, was completely captivated by the sight. Whoa. Luffy, just as Sanji had said, had his eyes were completely on Nami. For once, everything to him that mattered, such as his next meal and even being king of the pirates, no longer was for this single moment in his life. Now, even more so than before, he thought of Nami, how beautiful she was, how important she was to him, and how they, himself, Nami, and Mika, would continue moving on as a family with their crew friends' family to achieve their dreams and goals, and discover them as well. Luffy, the young captain, heard Zoro, but he could not look away from Nami. You found a good woman. Nearly absently, Luffy nodded his head, though still staring at Nami. Thanks. Zoro's smile grew slightly. He never would have thought Luffy could be more dumbfounded than now. When Nami finally reached the bottom of the stairs, Mika immediately greeted her. "Mama," she said, sounding amazed and cheerful. "You look so pretty." Nami smiled brightly, even more so, and bent down to her daughter's height. "Thank you, sweetie," she said happily, "so do you. Even without a dress? Especially," Nami said before wrapping Mika in a hug while keeping the flowers in hand. Her daughter immediately recuperated the same. When they broke, however, Nami's changed to confusion as she noticed something off about Mika. "Where's your flower basket?" she asked. Mika grinned proudly. "Auntie Robin said she would do the flowers." She then pulled up a pillow from behind her back. On it were the 2 rings that would bind Luffy and Nami together. The little girl then proudly spoke, "Now I get to be the cool ring bearer." While Nami was initially surprised by the sudden change up, she did not let it anger her, or more accurately, she could not be anger. Even if this was not what she wanted for her daughter, Nami valued that Mika still wanted to be a part of the ceremony, and that is all that really mattered. "Well then, my cool, little ring-bearing daughter," Nami said as she stood back up smiling and placing her arm around Sanji's arm, "you better start heading towards Daddy." Mika grinned and nodded happily. "Okay," she shouted before she began walk forward. Then, it was Robin's cue to do her part. "Ocho fleur," she said softly as she crossed her arms. 8 of her arms soon appeared on the side of the aisle and eventual Nami and Sanji where Mika would walk by. As Mika began walking down the aisle, Robin had her extra limbs burst into flower petals in front of the little girl 2 at a time. Nami watched this unfold and she, admittedly, found it much more enjoyable than just having her daughter do it herself. As Nami watched Mika reach the end, she noticed that she was not going over to stand with the others. Instead, she went up to Luffy. The 2 of them seemed to have a little moment where they hugged and then Mika joined next to Zoro's side. Apparently, the girl really wanted to be a part of the ceremony. "Oh Mika," Nami said to herself smiling warmly. Then, Brook began to play his violin. Yuka stood up and joined the others standing and looking at Nami. Everyone stood at attention. "This is it," Nami thought to herself happily. Nami and Sanji began walking down the aisle. As they did, Nami looked at each and every one of her crewmates and friends. Everyone was smiling towards, each happy for her, as she did to them, thankful for joining such a wonderful crew. The 2 of them walked all the way down until just before meeting Luffy. Then, Sanji bent down slight and took Nami's hand, giving her a chaste kiss before standing up. He then looked over to Luffy, smiling. "I don't think there's anything for me to say that I know you won't already do for Nami." Luffy smiled and nodded. Sanji accepted this and took his leave. He joined with the rest of the crew standing between Robin and Yuka and watched the rest of the ceremony. Nami smiled towards Sanji, appreciating his words before looking forward. She only took 1 step forward before already being right next to her husband-to-be. While still facing forward, Nami gave Luffy a comment. "You look handsome, Luffy." Luffy blushed slight before chuckling and grinning. "And you look really, really beautiful, Nami." Nami blushed slightly, looking very happy. "Alright," Zoro said as he returned to his usual grumpy mood, "let's get this over with." Brook immediately stopped playing. "Dearly," Zoro paused as he tried to remember the next part, "betrothed." Immediately, Sanji shouted in rage, "Get your lines right, you stupid moss head." "Shut up, dart brow," Sanji. Usopp said, holding the enraged chef back with Chopper, now in heavy point. Everyone else kept their calm, especially Nami, who was definitely annoyed by the sudden outburst. She forced a smile as she looked directly at Zoro and ordered tensely, "Please continue, Zoro." In seeing Nami's expression, Zoro quickly returned to form as he continued with the ceremony, "Dearly beloved." Finally, "Shush, Sanji, forget it," Zoro said as he could not clearly remember his lines. "We are all here today to celebrate the marriage of our captain, Monkey D. Luffy, and the navigator of the Straw Hat Pirates, Nami. As the first member of the crew, I was there when she first joined. I didn't think she was trustworthy at the time, but I eventually came to see her as our one and only navigator as well. I would also like to say, again, about damn time." "Oi," Nami said, starting to lose her patience. "Anyway, if you 2 want to say anything to each other, say so now." "I do," Nami said as she turned to Luffy, him doing the same. "Luffy, when we met, I only wanted to use you for my own gain. I overlooked your otherwise nice personality and saw you as a bad person because you were a pirate. If I could, I think I would slap myself for that line of thinking." Luffy remained silent. But as he traveled together, I saw the real you. A brave, often reckless, man who would always do what's right in your own way. Whether that meant just beating someone up or waiting for a foolish girl to ask for help. You've done so much me. Saving my village, getting me to a doctor. Bringing me on, willed me with a wonderful daughter. I don't think I can ever repay you for that. You may think you have a debt with me, but honestly, I have more of one to you. Nami, but that's not why I'm marrying you, Nami continued. I'm marrying you because you never gave up on the foolish girl who had nearly given up on saving her village. For the man who would risk his life for any of his crew and who in turn would risk theirs for him. A man who can be so selfish that he's actually helping others unknowingly. The man who loves his family, even if it's a weird one. For trusting me with not just one, but two of his precious treasures. And most importantly, for the man I fell in love with. I love you so much. I would be honored to be your wife and one day your queen. I will always be your navigator. There was a small pause as everyone let Nami's words sink in. Everyone was smiling, some even slightly crying, as they were touched by her words. Now, it was Luffy's turn. Nami, Luffy said, smiling softly before turning it into a grin, I love you. It was short, but if you think about it, this simple, mundane phrase meant so much more to the couple. I, meaning Luffy, love, one of the most powerful emotions felt by mankind, and the most important of all. You, meaning Nami and only Nami. In this one sentence, Luffy conveyed everything. He loved Nami for her skills, for which she used to help and aid himself, his daughter, and crew with. He loved Nami as his crewmate and friend, who would never turn on them. He loved Nami as the mother of his child, for though it was an experience neither of them knew much on, she always did her best. He loved her even when she gets angry at him, because even then, she was still looking out for him. He loved her greedy side, which tended to make many quiver in fear, as she always made sure to use the money to help out the crew. He loved her as a woman and a lover, as there are some things that only those close together can convey to each other openly and support each other from now until they die. Simply put it, what Luffy is saying is, I love you, all of you, Nami. But would Nami understand that? Could she understand the layers of deepness hidden in a common phrase used by every couple everywhere? Yes, she did. In just hearing those words, those simple words, Nami could feel all that Luffy could and would convey. She nearly teared up just thinking about it all. Not even hesitating for a moment, Nami hugged Luffy, almost breaking her bouquet. It surprised him, but Luffy graciously hugged her back. Ahu! Cheered out Usopp as he and everyone started clapping and cheering. They had not even been married yet, but they could not help cheering them on. Alright, let's finish this up, Zoro said, interrupting the moment. Everyone soon calmed down. Luffy and Nami soon separated. They both flashed a loving and caring smile towards each other before turning to Zoro. Now, it was time to finish this ceremony. Now then, if there isn't anyone stupid enough to try and object. Zoro paused for a moment, knowing full well no one would speak up. He then turned and addressed Mika. Give them the rings. Mika immediately did so. She walked up right in front of Zoro and held up the rings to her parents. Thank you, Mika. Nami said, smiling as she took the ring for the husband. Thanks, Luffy said with a grin as he took the ring for the wife. With the rings gone, Mika took a step back and joined by Zoro's side. She did not want to miss this. After Luffy and Nami slipped the rings onto each other, they stood hand in hand, continuing to face each other. Then, by the power granted to me by our captain, Zoro said loudly and proudly for everyone to hear, I declare these two, husband and wife. You may now kiss the bride. Luffy grinned brightly as he flipped the veil off Nami's face. With both of them smiling, they came together right in the middle and kissed. Immediately, nearly all the men in the room whooped and hallowed and cheered as the union was finally official. Brook began playing music again, though now in cheerful celebration of the happy union. Yuka and Robin simply clapped, cheering on the couple in their own way. Akio was doing the same, though only because his mother was doing so as well. In reality, he thought the kissing was gross. Zoro just stood before the couple, smiling proudly and equally as joyful as the rest of the crew. And though Mika thought the kissing was a little gross, She was far happier than anyone in the crew seeing how much her parents loved each other. Luffy and Nami soon broke off the kiss. They looked at each other and flashed happy grins towards each other. While holding hands, the two newly married couple turned to face the crowd basking in their cheer and admiration. Suddenly, they both felt a little hand on top of theirs. They looked down to see Mika, grinning. She seemed to have wanted to join them. Without hesitation, the couple's hands broke apart only to now join them with Mika's hands. The adults raised their hands slightly high with Mika's hands in tow as they showed to everyone the officially complete Monkey D family, and everyone cheered. The union of Monkey D, Luffy and Nami was now complete. Last time on One Piece, Straw Hat family. I'm terribly sorry, Yuka said, apologetic. It's okay, Nami said, now smiling, appreciative of the apology. Whoever heard of pirates getting married anyways? Now don't say that, Yuka said before smiling supportively. Everyone has the right to be happy however they may find it. If you want to have this wedding, and everything is ready, you should do it immediately. Everyone, Nami said loudly, thus gaining everyone's attention. I have an announcement to make. Huh? What is it, Nami? Asked Luffy, confused. Today, we're doing the wedding and nothing is going to stop it. We are all here today to celebrate the marriage of our captain, Monkey D. Luffy, and the navigator of the Straw Hat Pirates, Nami. I love you so much. I would be honored to be your wife and one day your queen. I will always be your navigator. Nami, Luffy said, smiling softly before turning it into a grin, I love you. Then by the power granted to me by our captain, Zoro said loudly and proudly for everyone to hear, I declare these two, husband and wife. You may now kiss the bride. Luffy grinned brightly as he flipped the veil off Nami's face. With both of them smiling, they came together right in the middle and kissed. After Luffy and Nami were finally married, the only thing to do after was the reception. Or better known as another Straw Hat party. Setup was quick and Sanji prepared the food with zeal and swiftness. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew began the party. At the urging of Yuka, Luffy and Nami had a dance. She had told them it was tradition for the new husband and wife to dance together at their reception. They did so as Brook played a lovely, soft song suited for the occasion. It was a beautiful sight seeing Nami in her dress dancing with the handsome Captain Luffy. Though, Luffy was a bit clumsy doing so. Afterwards, they all went back to partying as they usually did. Akio! 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 Do this! Mika shouted as she pointed to her face. She had taken a page out of her father's book as she had two chopsticks stuck in nostrils and into her lower lip. Akio stared at Mika, confused. Why, Mika? Nami said urgently. Don't do that lame trick, you'll hurt yourself. Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper on the other hand were more supportive. Especially since they too were doing the same thing. Yeah, Akio! Join in the fun, shouted the three immature adults. You three are terrible influences, shouted Nami enraged. Ow, 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 Frankie shouted out as he danced to Brook's song. He was grooving to the beat the best way he could, through his poses. Of course, Brook was playing a song upon his violin. A joyful and spirited tune that he could not help but also dance to. Zoro was drinking other to the side of the crowd. He had several bottles around him, some empty but many filled. He would enjoy himself this day. Robin and Yuka both sat by a small table placed earlier. Yuka clapped along happily with the tune of Brook's song, enjoying the amusement and activities of the others. Robin just sat by smiling and also enjoying her crew's merrymaking. Sanji soon left the kitchen, carrying plates of delicious-smelling food. Food's ready, he shouted. Yay, food! Luffy shouted with zeal. Everyone stopped doing what they were doing after hearing that the food was ready. They all quickly came over to the tables and began partaking in the food prepared. There were many delicious dishes ranging from juicy, cooked meat to healthy salads to beautiful desserts. As everyone began eating, Usopp stood before everyone. Ahem. Usopp started with to gain everyone's attention. He then held up his mug as he began making his speech. Now that everyone's here, it's time for the best man to give his speech. This certainly grabbed the attention of some noted individuals. What? Zoro shouted, placing down his mug. I already said my word, Usopp. Shut up, Moss Head. Sanji said coolly. He's referring to me, obviously. Usopp shook his head. Actually, I was referring, he then flashed a cocky grin, to me. Immediately, the cocky sniper was hit with a black shoe and mug. Like hell you are, shouted both Sanji and Zoro. They both then instantly noticed they were mimicking each other, which of course, set them off even more. What? You think you're the best man? They said as they began butting heads. Nami sighed in annoyance. Those guys, if Luffy were not distracted, he may have been able to delegate this touchy situation. Unfortunately, with so much food out, he was too interested in filling his bottomless stomach. Doing what he did best, Luffy was snatching up others' food while also taking more from the plates. Daddy, shouted Mika mad. Don't take my food. Hey, shouted Akio next. He took mine too. Luffy chuckled. You snooze, I eat. It's, you lose, said Nami before slapping the back of his head, and don't teach your daughter your bad manners. Yuka laughed seeing how lively everyone was being. This pirate crew she and her son had come to know was incredibly odd. Despite having all experienced and shared a touching moment, they could still argue with each other or be mad over something small. It was refreshing in its own way. As everyone ate and laughed, loud coughing suddenly broke the air of joy and laughter. Everyone went quiet, but the coughing did not stop. All the straw hats and the kids looked over at Yuka, the one coughing. The woman covered her mouth the best she could. As her coughing softened slightly, Yuka took a look at her hand and saw blood in it. She could not see it, but blood was also dripping from her mouth. Yuka then collapsed as she lost her breath due to her coughing. Everyone gasped in shock. Yuka per megasecond Yuka, mom. Death in the family, a burial for a loving mother. The reception was instantly over. Yuka was immediately brought into Chopper's medical room as quickly as possible. Chopper then went to work trying to help Yuka the best he could. Everyone else stood outside, waiting, wondering, and hoping for the best. Among them, Akio was looking absolutely terrified and nearly crying. Mika too looked just as shocked. She had never seen someone start bleeding like that. It was a little scary for her. All the adults of course were extremely worried. The most evident among them were Nami. Everyone else remained more or less stoic. It was not long before Chopper finally exited the room, currently in his brainpoint form. Everyone stiffened, hoping beyond hope, but the grim expression on Chopper's face was evidence enough. I'm sorry, Chopper said, lowering his head down, unable to meet anyone's eye. There's nothing I can do. Akio looked at the reindeer heartbroken. No, Chopper began shedding tears as he painfully spoke again. Ms. Yuka probably won't make it through the night. No, finally, Akio broke down. The boy began shedding tears as he ran into the medical room. The Straw Hats remained completely silent. Many of them were showing their shock while others remained stoic. Nami was probably the most distraught besides Akio and Chopper. The poor reindeer himself was still crying as well, seeing how painful delivering this news was. I'm so sorry, guys. Chopper said as he lifted his head. He was clearly still crying as his tears flowed like rivers out of his eyes. His blue nose was beginning to run with snot. Hey, Chopper, Usopp said as he walked over and patted the young reindeer. It's not your fault. There was no way you could have prevented this. Still, Chopper shouted, still feeling bad. I wanted to help her, how could she have gotten worse? Nami gasped in realization. She spoke feeling ashamed. We talked last night, and I mentioned I didn't have a wedding dress. I told her I didn't need one, but then today, she had one. I think she traveled to her home and back. Sanji took a cigarette out. Despite Mika being in plain view, he just felt like he needed it now. He stuck it in his mouth and lit it. He smoked before he spoke up. She must have pushed herself to give you a beautiful memory, laying her head down sad. She shouldn't have done that. There's no point dwelling on that now, Zoro commented calmly. Mama, spoke up Mika softly and a little scared. What's wrong with Ms. Yuka? Nami looked down at daughter. She frowned, seeing how confused yet also hurt Mika was currently experiencing. Mika. What did Uncle Chopper mean by she won't make it through the night? Mika asked, beginning to tear up. Mika, isn't she alright? Asked Mika as a few tears began flowing down her face. Nami was unable to say any more. She took Mika and gently wrapped her in a hug, pulling her in close. Nami remained strong as she held her daughter, though she too felt like crying. I'm sorry, said Nami softly yet sad, but Ms. Yuka is not okay. In the medical room, Akio had run to his mother. Seeing his mother in bed, sick and dying, only seemed to make his sadness even worse. He didn't even know why he went into this room. He came here out of pure instinct, needing comfort from his mother. He had then rushed over to his mother's side, only to stop at her bedside. He sprawled over the side and continued crying into the bed. Being his mother, Yuka wasn't surprised. She immediately comforted the boy, placing her hand on the boy's head and rubbing it gently. "Shish, shish," Yuka said, trying to calm her son. "Everything will be okay, Akio." "No, it's not," cried out Akio, quickly. Yuka frowned and went quiet. Her son had every right to not believe her. But still, that did not mean she had to let her son feel sad and depressed. "But everything will be okay," she told her son again more confidently. Akio clenched his teeth and shook his head in the sheets. "No, it won't, you're dying." "I know, and I'm sorry," Yuka said, smiling sadly. "I wanted to be there for much of your life like I had always hoped, but it seems fate had different plans." Akio looked up from the bed covers. He was still crying as he told his mother, "I don't want you to die." "I know," Yuka said softly before moving closer to hug her son and comfort him more. "I know." "What am I going to do?" Akio whispered softly, sounding afraid. "Oh, Akio," Yuka said, smiling warmly as she began stroking the boy's back. "I know you'll know what to do. You're such a bright boy. That's why your father named you, Akio, because we hoped the best for you." Immediately, Akio became angry. He broke away from his mother's hug, and looked up at her, showing his anger. "How can you still think about that guy?" Yuka looked at her son, upset. "Akio, he hasn't come back in years. He's not coming back. He's a jerk. But you keep praising him like he's some hero. He's not." Then, Akio left quickly. Despite being also sad, he could not face his mother being so angry. "Akio," Yuka spoke out aghast. She had attempted to stop him, but could not in her condition. With the door left open, Nami peered inside the room looking confused. It was obvious that she had caught sight of the boy running out of the room angry and sad at the same time. This made her concerned for the sickly woman, so she had come in to check on her. "Ms. Yuka?" Yuka gave out a sigh. "I'm afraid I made the mistake of bringing up his father, my husband Daisuke. He's not overly fond of him." "Is there a reason?" Nami asked as she approached the sick woman. "I think it's because he has never met him. He left shortly after he was born, off to make the world a better place for us," Yuka said fondly. As Nami sat down next to Yuka, she looked at the woman surprised. "Is he with the Marines?" Responded Yuka with a hum. She was smiling contentedly, though seemingly unsure herself what it is he did. While not a clear answer, Nami left things be. It did not really concern her. In fact, it was probably better for her not to know. "Since you're here, Nami," Yuka suddenly spoke, gaining the woman's full attention. "I wanted to ask a favor." "You do?" "Yes," Yuka said, nodding. "I know you don't owe me anything, but if it weren't too much trouble, I was wondering if you could perhaps accept Akio onto your crew." Nami stared at Yuka, shocked. "What? That is, if you think you can." "Ms. Yuka, I know," Yuka said quickly, cutting Nami off, smiling knowingly. "It's probably not feasible for you all. I'm sorry." "No, I mean," Nami said, unsure. "I know we seem friendly, but we're still a pirate crew. We might not be dangerous, but there are hundreds of pirate crews, and on top of that the Marines, which could hurt Akio. And Mika too. Don't you think he would be safer staying on this island?" "He would," Yuka said, agreeing, "but I don't think he would be happy here." Without being told, Nami understood what the woman meant. "All right," she said cautiously. "I'll have to ask Luffy and crew though. Luffy is the captain and it's his decision to make, and everyone needs to be okay with it." Yuka smiled and nodded. "If you could run it by everyone, I would appreciate it." Nami nodded silently in agreement. When Akio had run out, nearly every Straw Hat had turned to see him. Only Mika did not, choosing to remain face down in her Aunt Robin's lap. Meanwhile, the rest were surprised to suddenly see the boy. When they noticed that the boy was crying, they figured that something was still wrong. As they saw the boy heading for the gangplank, a few of them became concerned. Quickly, and being closest to the boy, Usopp and Frankie attempted to stop the boy. "Whoa!" shouted Frankie quickly while holding out his arms and hands out to block the path. "Hold up, kid. Yeah, don't. Usopp was then cut off as Akio kicked him right in the family jewels. The man hadn't expected it to happen, and was completely unguarded. Thus, he shrieked out loudly in pain and fell over. Long nose bro. Frankie shouted out in shock. With the two adults distracted, Akio sought to escape. As he was about to step onto the gangplank, he was suddenly and surprisingly surrounded by feminine arms and hands. Some of them even appearing on his body. Frozen with shock, the limbs quickly wrapped around the boy and halted his movement off the ship. Confused, he shouted, "What?" Of course, this was obviously Robin's doing. She had her free hand up and crossed across her body as her usual gesture for activating her power. With the boy stopped, Robin spoke to him with a stern gaze. "Now is not the time to run away, little boy." "Let me go," shouted Akio angrily, still shedding tears. "I won't," Robin stated calmly. Hearing her aunt speak, Mika turned her head. Though she was still crying, she was curious to what was happening. What she saw surprised her. As the boy struggled in the arms, he felt someone grab the scruff of his shirt. The arms disappeared into flower petals and he was lifted up suddenly. Akio turned his head to see that it was the Straw Hat Captain himself that had grabbed him. The scary but serious expression he was making made the boy stop moving out of fear. "What do you think you're doing?" Luffy asked sternly. Despite how serious the man sounded, the boy had decided to not be compliant. He began to start thrashing about in the man's grip while shouting, "Let me go. I don't want to be here anymore." "Your mom is dying," Luffy stated clearly and without hesitation, remaining stern. "And the last thing she wants is to see her kid running away from like she's some kind of monster. Do you think your mom is happy that you are running away from her?" Having heard this, Akio stopped struggling in the man's clutch. He lowered his head ashamed, realizing that what the man was very much correct. Seeing that the boy was done struggling, Luffy lowered him down. "You don't need to go back into her room if you don't feel up to it," he stated calmly. "But don't run off and make her feel worse." But," Akio said nervously, and still sad, "do you want for your mother's last memory of you to be a sad one?" Akio remained silent for a moment. The man's question had stuck him hard. Immediately, he calmed down. "I'm sorry," he apologized sadly. "Don't tell me that," Luffy said apathetically. "Akio?" Evison looked back at the medical room. The young woman was standing by the railing. She appeared to have been looking for the boy. The chocolate brown-haired boy looked to the lady. While he still felt angry over his father, he knew his mother didn't deserve it. Without replying back to her, Akio walked up the stairs and over past Nami. He then walked back into the medical room, and he closed the door behind him. "Damn, Captain," Sanji said, smiling with astonishment. "I didn't think you could get serious in moments like these." "Very impressive," Brooke said, agreeing with the chef. A little confused, Nami looked out to her crew. She asked, "What happened?" Hearing Nami first, Chopper spoke to the woman. "How is she?" he asked, concerned. "She's fine for the moment," Nami said as she walked down the stairs. She was worried about Akio, but I guess he got over it. "You should thank your husband for that," Zoro stated while leaning against the mast. Nami looked at Zoro surprised. "Really?" she asked before looking over at Luffy himself. It was then at seeing him that she recalled her conversation earlier with Yuka. While she wanted to ask him immediately, she felt that the time was not yet right. Not with the children still awake, she decided to wait until later to ask. After much time had passed, the sun was beginning to set. Not much else was done this day after the wedding, the reception. No one spoke of the inevitable fate of Ms. Yuka. Mika, the usual bundle of limitless energy, had actually remained quiet for the rest of the day. She had stopped crying, though still feeling bad. She didn't feel like playing. Eventually, she just went to her room claiming to be going to bed. Around the same time, Akio had been sent out of the medical room by his mother for bed. He silently went with Mika to her room. Neither one spoke to other. In the meantime, Nami spoke to the crew about what Yuka had asked of them. As they sat around the deck, the orange-haired woman spoke to them of Yuka's request. To say they were a little surprised would be an understatement. Most didn't think that they would acquire another so soon, much less one that wasn't related to any of them. "What do you guys think?" asked Nami to her crew. "I think," Usopp said, being the first to speak, "while it would be good for Mika to have someone her age around, it'll probably be more trouble for us in the future for sure." Yes, but we already accepted that with Mika-chan. What's one more child? Brooke stated, trying to be logical. Sanji blew smoke before he replied next. One more mouth to feed. We'd be risking the lives of 2 kids now, Frankie stated, frowning unhappily. Don't say that. Nami said, wincing a bit. Every time I think about that, it makes me feel like I'm a bad parent. We all know that's not true, Robin said, reassuring the young woman and smiling. Mika is very happy living with you, Luffy, and us. There have certainly been a few snags, but we have overcome them together. Nami smiled and nodded. Yeah, we have. Not to ruin the mood, Zoro spoke, acting serious, but I'm not all for letting the kid join just to watch over him. What? Shouted many of the crew. How could you be so mean, Zoro? Shouted Usopp angrily. Yeah, you jerk, shouted Chopper, also mad. Don't you have a heart? Both Chopper and Usopp shouted together in rage. As his 2 crewmates yelled at him, Zoro became increasingly annoyed with them. So much so that he shouted, "Shut up!" Immediately, the 2 back off and the green-haired man quickly cooled down before he began speaking again. All I'm saying is, this kid is not getting the same treatment as Mika. If he is going to join, he's joining as an official crew member. Luffy blinked in surprise. He hadn't thought of a new crew member joining in a long while, and he had never thought about having a kid join. Not unless they could do something cool. But was Akio someone cool he would want on the crew? Meanwhile, everyone else looked at Zoro surprised. That's a thought, Frankie stated, being serious. Should we allow a child to officially join the crew? Brooke asked, curious. Technically, we already did, Usopp stated, obviously referring to Mika. Chopper nodded fervently. He's right. Granted, Usopp said, continuing statement, she was born into the crew. Sanji took a moment to think as he also blew out smoke from cigarette. Anyway, I have to agree with Moss Head on this. If we're going to take on Akio, it'll be as a crewmate and not as a charge. Mika is only one who gets to be pampered for free. I don't know, Nami said, unsure. She wasn't sure if Yuka would accept such conditions for her son. It seemed a little harsh. I think our captain has already decided, Robin stated, looking off somewhere, smiling with amusement. The crew looked at the woman surprised before turning to look where their captain sat. His spot was completely empty, prompting group to look up to see their captain already on the 2nd deck. He was already walking in the medical. The last thing they saw was their captain grinning before entering the room. Luffy had heard enough from his crew's delegation, not like he ever needed a reason. Still, this was an important decision that needed it. As Luffy entered the room, he quickly greeted the woman. Hi, Ms. Yuka. Yuka instantly smiled. Hello, Captain Luffy. So, Luffy said as he took a seat on Chopper's office chair. Yes, Yuka asked, curious. I want Akio to join my crew as our cabin boy. The sickly woman was taken by surprise by the sudden forwardness of the man. While she had expected there to be some hesitation, she couldn't believe that the man would so quickly accept her request, albeit slightly different. Still, she was happy. You will? Yuka said, overjoyed. But, Luffy said in conjecture, I won't force him to join. Yuka's joy lessened instantly. The woman had to take a moment to think over what the man had said. While she liked that her son had the option, it was a little less encouraging knowing her son could decline. And after this whole experience, he may just. Nevertheless, she had to accept and hope her son would accept. Very well, Luffy, thank you. Luffy grinned back the woman. No problem, he said happily, I hope he joins. Yuka smiled and nodded. Yes, she said softly, I hope he does too. When all was said and done, everyone turned in for the night. In the morning, Chopper was the first up to check on Yuka. He hoped beyond hope that he somehow misdiagnosed the woman and that she was sleeping peacefully. As he entered the medical room, he looked at the bed in which the woman was lying on. He approached cautiously, neither wanting to wake her up or find out the truth. As he saw the woman's face, oddly smiling softly, he began to feel nauseous from nervousness. Ms. Yuka? Chopper spoke nervously. Yuka did not respond. Cautiously, he gave the woman a light poke to wake her. She did not wake. Immediately, Head began checking her. He first began looking over the woman visually. He found that her chest wasn't moving. He went in closer and felt the woman's hand. It was cold. Becoming fearful, Chopper then checked the woman's pulse. There was none. With all the signs there, the young reindeer lowered his head. He tried hard to fight back the tears, but he simply could not. Even after knowing this would be the result, he still couldn't help but mourn. Yuka, mother of Akio, was dead. When the whole crew and the kids were up, Chopper had waited just before breakfast to tell them news. Every adult remained silent, lowering their heads in sadness and respect. Mika was far less prepared for this moment. She had immediately began crying. Luckily, her father was nearby to provide comfort for his daughter. On the other hand, Akio was trying his best not to cry. Like he did not want to seem weak in front of everyone for a second time. Despite that, the adult knew very much. Preparations were made immediately. They held a small memorial ceremony the same day for the young, brave, courageous woman known as Yuka, coffin for the woman giving a casket fit for a noble or a queen. They had only recently known her, but each member of the crew had something nice to say about the woman. The only ones who could or would not speak were the children. Most of the men carried the coffin off the ship with everyone else following behind them. All the while, Brook played a beautiful yet sad tune on his violin in honor of Yuka. From the Thousand Sunny, the group walked to a spot they had picked. It was a nice spot on a cliff just a half a mile away. Once they reached the exact spot, the men dug up the hole and buried the coffin in Yuka. After finishing the burial, Frankie placed a white stone marker at the head of the grave. So that anyone and everyone would know there was someone buried here and that she deserved their honor and respect. The head marker read, "Here lies Yuka, generous of heart, constant of faith. Friend of the Straw Hat Pirates, devoted mother, and a courageous woman. Until we meet again." Even after everything was said and done, the whole crew and the children stayed before the grave in silence. They stood there for many minutes until eventually the Straw Hats felt like it was time to leave. The Straw Hats began heading back to the Thousand Sunny, but they noticed that Akio wasn't moving from his spot. Immediately, Nami walked back over attempting to talk to the boy. Akio," the boy didn't respond, so she continued. We were thinking that you could stay with us for a bit until." "Away," Akio said quietly with his head held low. Nami hummed, unable to hear the boy clearly. Akio clenched his teeth with anger. He lifted his head up and glared at the woman angrily and hurt, though also shedding tears. He shouted loudly, "Go away." Nami leaned back, caught by surprise by the boy's attitude. Before she could even respond to it, she watched as the boy took off into the forest. Akio," she tried calling out in an attempt to stop the boy. Unfortunately, he did not listen and the boy disappeared into the forest. The crew had heard the boy's shout and immediately stopped to look back. They were surprised as well when the boy took off into the woods. "Nami?" spoke Usopp, confused. "What happened?" asked Zoro. Nami started saying, looking both sad and confused. "I was just telling him he could stay with us for a little bit." "The poor boy," Robin said sadly. "He's probably emotional and mentally unstable after everything that happened so far." Chopper gasped as a thought came to his mind. "You don't think he'll do something to hurt himself?" Robin closed her eyes, finding the idea unpleasant. "I hope not," she replied back. "I can relate to the young boy's instability." Brook spoke, sounding sad and distant. "It had taken myself a long time for me to recover after the loss of my old crew." "But you recovered?" Sanji stated to clarify. "Yes, but it was hard. The memories of my old crew and promise to return to Laboon are what kept me going through that dismal fog and haunted waters. But I fear that young Akio doesn't have the same fortitude that I, an adult and pirate, have. He shouldn't be left alone." "I agree," Nami said as she walked back to crew. "We need to find him." Mama," Mika said, speaking up. "Daddy left already." "What?" shouted most of the crew, surprised. They all looked back to find their captain missing from his spot. "Where the hell did he go?" shouted Zoro, annoyed. Immediately, a shoe hit the back of Zoro's head. "Ow." "Watch your mouth around Mika," Nami said, scolding the man. Zoro replied back with a low growl, but refrained from saying anything further. "Where did Daddy?" Mika asked, confused. Frankie looked over at the forest. "You don't think he already went after Akio?" "Probably," Nami replied, sounding sure. "We should probably go out and find them then," Sanji said with some disdain, though mostly towards having to find their silly captain. "No," Nami said, surprising everyone. "Luffy's got this." Robin looked at Nami curiously. She immediately asked, "Why do you say that?" Because he knows how Akio feels right now. He lost his mother a similar way. The most of the crew looked at Nami stunned. What? Many of them said, with the exception of Zoro and Robin. They were still just as startled by this fact, especially Robin. He told me about it the day before, Nami said as she held her arm uncomfortably. Daddy's mama too, Mika said sadly. Yes, sweetie, a long time ago when he was only a little younger than you. Several years ago, up on a certain mountain during a blizzard in winter, a lone figure was trudging through the snow. This light pink coat-wearing person held their body close trying to keep warm. The person's face was covered with a cloth to help with keeping warm as well. Unfortunately, none of it seemed to be working much as the person still shivered with cold. As the person kept walking, the person spoke sounding determined and fearless. I gotta find it, the person, now identified as a woman from her voice, said before looking around. I need to find it, the woman continued to slowly walk forward. This was clearly a woman on a mission, but what that mission was unclear. As the woman moved further up the mountain, she had unknowingly attracted some unwanted attention. With a paw crashing through the snow, a large bear was trudging towards the woman with a fierce and hungry gaze. As it got closer, it let out a roar. The woman heard the roar over the howling wind and turned around to see the bear. It stood nearly 3 times her size as he stood before her. It looked wild and cruel as its piercing red eyes stared down at its next victim. Any person would be afraid of this beast, and yet the woman looked only annoyed in seeing the animal. I don't have time for this, the woman said loudly as she turned her fully towards the beast. She held her arms and fists out as she glared threateningly at the bear. He needs medicine. The bear released a roar as it raised his paw about to attack. The woman didn't look afraid of the beast. In fact, she looked ready to fight it. As the bear swung its paw, the woman charged straight at the bear fearlessly. She was determined to win. I won't let Luffy down. Meanwhile, down in Fuchsia village on the outskirts of the small village, a lone house stood by itself on the edge of the forest in the shadow of the mountain the brave young woman was on. While it seemed like a blizzard on the mountain, at the village it was only snowing lightly. Inside the lone building, 2 adults were looking after a sick child. They were Whoop Slap and Makino, both looking much younger than they would be in present time, and they were both trying to help the young, 4-year-old Luffy with his illness. The poor child was red with fever and breathing hoarsely. This is the story before the story. Before the Straw Hat. This is the story of, not the man, but the woman that raised the boy who would become infamously known as Straw Hat, Luffy. A story that would forever impact the life of a young boy and leave a scar on his heart. This is the story of Monkey D. Luffy's mother. Monkey D. starred the time of young Luffy's childhood many years ago, before meeting his brothers and even before meeting Shanks. He lived as a small child with his mother, Monkey D. Star in the East Blue. Here, Luffy and his mother lived in relative peace and joy, enjoying each and every day. Of course, as a young man, he would only barely recall this time in his life. He nevertheless considered it precious. But out of all the memories that he would keep of his young life, this one memory would stand out throughout his life like a scar upon his heart. On Dawn Island, in the midst of spring, there lies Windmill Village. This peaceful town was going about their daily activities. Collecting groceries, repairing damages, tending to the fields, out fishing, and much more. As it was a small village, there were hardly any crowds in dirt streets that made up. That did not mean that it wasn't busy. Currently in the streets were 2 young and beautiful women conversing and walking, one of whom was carrying some bags full of food. One had dark green hair, was a tad shorter than the woman she was happily conversing with. The other woman who was carrying the bags had long, messy, black hair. Did Luffy really do that? Asked the young woman surprised. The other woman snickered. He did, Makino, and I couldn't believe it, she said grinning with pride. He got the whole troop of monkeys to follow him around. It was so cute. The woman, Makino, giggled lightly. That son of yours, Star, she said amused, he does the most incredible things. So, how did you get the monkeys to leave? Well, Star said as she raised her hand up making a fist, and grinning with confidence. I just laid down the law of the jungle. Immediately, Makino began laughing. As much as the feats of her son were impressive, the woman she had known for her whole life was still just as or more so impressive. Eventually, Star began laughing with her younger friend. These two women were enjoying their conversation greatly. That is, until Star's laughter quickly turned into a rough and hoarse cough. While the black-haired woman quickly covered her mouth, Makino stopped laughing and looked at the older woman with great concern and worry. Star, Makino said with a frown, that cough sounds worse than it was last week. As her coughing began settling down, Star replied back to her friend. I'm okay. Really? She said with a smile. Makino wasn't convinced, however. That's what you said when you had gotten sap stuck in your hair when we were kids. You tried getting it out, but made it worse. In the end, you had to get most of your hair cut by Mayor Whoop Slap. Star chuckled with nostalgia. Yeah, not one of my best ideas. Her expression then turned serious as she spoke to her friend, but really, I'm fine, little sis. Please, Makino said to the woman sounding urgent, go to the doctor, if not for my sake but for Luffy's sake. The older woman stopped walking upon hearing the request. Her brow began to furrow as she felt slightly conflicted. After moments of contemplation, Star released a sigh. All right, I'll go to the doctor, she said, sounding almost as if she had been defeated. Surprisingly, Makino was still not convinced. Do you promise to see the doctor today? She asked sternly. Why yes, Star said, almost slightly afraid of the shorter woman. Makino then smiled. Good. But, Star suddenly said in addition, only after I take care of lunch for Luffy. The green-haired woman nodded. Okay, she said calmly. Though she still had her concerns, she didn't feel like a small divergent would do any harm. Stat immediately grinned. Good, she said happily. She then kept walking again while Makino stayed on the edge of the village. While Makino watched her friend travel down the road, a man came walking up from behind her. He was a small man, middle-aged at best, wearing oval glasses. This was Whoop Slap, the mayor of Windmill Village, and as he walked up next to Makino, the expression on his face showed a great amount of concern. Is Star still neglecting her health? He asked openly for Makino to hear. Sadly, Makino nodded. Yes, she said, but I made her promise me this time, especially since I mentioned it was for Luffy's sake. Immediately, Whoop Slap began frowning with displeasure. That girl, always making me worry about her. When she ran off to get that plant from the mountain in winter, I nearly had a heart attack seeing all her wounds. The young woman frowned as she too remembered that day. The young boy is severely sick. I've got a few remedies, but without that flower I'm afraid the boy will die. I'll get the flower, Doc. Just take care of my son. Star, what happened to you? You're cut and bruised. Makino, I got it. She's still the same reckless and stubborn girl even after all these years. Whoop Slap continued saying, crotchety and displeased. The green-haired shook her head. No, I think she's a little different, Makino said, smiling optimistically. After all, she's married now, and has Luffy to take care of. Even though it was a disagreement, the man couldn't help but agree slightly with the young woman's statement. Yeah, I guess so, he said, sounding almost a little proud. At least that girl learned some responsibility when she met Garp's son. Makino nodded in agreement, smiling fondly. In her head, memories of a certain time in her life played out like it was only yesterday. Hey, Garp's son, a much younger, probably in her teens, Star shouted loudly towards a young man in the village. This Star was covered in few cuts, bruises, and with dirt all over her body as if she had tussled with an animal. Her hair was even wilder than it would be presently. Before Star was a young man with a serious and stern expression with short black hair. He stood surrounded by a crowd along with Star by the many citizens of Windmill Village. Among them was younger versions of Garp, Whoop Slap, and even Dayton. She and her gang were among the crowd. Garp, wearing a Hawaiian shirt, looked to be amused by the display. Standing in front of the young Whoop Slap was an even younger Makino, probably a child, as she watched on in amazement. What do you want, girl? Replied the male teen, annoyed. Star grinned as she raised up her fists. Fight me, she said determinedly. Returning back to the present, Star was walking alone towards a lone house on the edge of the forest. As she walked closer to the house, her house, she caught sight of a little figure running around in the yard. A child, her child. She smiled brightly as she spied her son having fun on some adventure he made up to entertain himself. He looked to having so much fun, She hated to interrupt his fun. Luckily, as the boy turned around, preparing to throw a punch, he spotted her. Instantly, he began beaming brightly. "Mommy!" Luffy shouted happily before stopping everything and running at his mother. Star smiled and stopped walking. As her son came running at her, she bent down and held her arms out towards the boy. She then caught the boy and gave him a great big hug. "Luffy," she said happily. Luffy laughed as he hugged his mother back. Soon though, the boy spoke again, this time bluntly. "I'm hungry, Mommy." Immediately, Star laughed out. "Of course you are, my hungry, little monkey," she said before holding up her grocery bag smiling. "Look what I got." The little boy gasped as he instantly recognized what was in the bag. "Meat," he cheered out as he threw his hands and arms up. "Meat, meat, meat." Again, Star laughed. All right, she said as she stood back up. "Let's get inside so you can eat." Yay! The young mother and her son went inside the home. Inside, it was simple setup for the family of two. The house only had one room, which was practically every room: bedroom, kitchen, dining room, living room, and everything else except a bathroom. That luckily was outside behind the house by the forest. There wasn't much furniture either, just what was necessary. There weren't even that many toys for a child to play with. And yet, neither one had any issue weaved, for they got by well enough. Inside, Star began cooking up most of the food she had already acquired. As she did this, young Luffy waited in the only way he could. Impatiently and constantly in motion. The little boy simply ran around the room just laughing and amusing himself. Star was careful not to accidentally run into her excited son as she cooked with gusto. In a few minutes, she was done cooking. Instantly, Luffy stopped his running and hopped into his seat. After setting the food on the table, mostly meat with a few cooked vegetables, Star joined him at the table. Just as the eager young boy was about to dig into his meal, Star lightly slapped the boy's wrist. "Luffy," Star said, being lightly stern, "before eating we must give thanks." "Oh yeah," the young boy said, smiling unashamed. He then put his hands together and chanted out, "Thank you for the food." Star mirrored the same hand gesture. "Thank you for the food," she said softly. They both then began eating. While Star ate with the grace of a lady at a tea party, her son was completely the opposite. The little boy gobbled down food like this would be his last meal. He loved the meals his mother prepared, proudly proclaiming to anyone that his mother was the best cook in the world. Always, Star was flattered. As the two ate their meal, Star soon recalled the promise she made to her friend. So, almost begrudgingly, she informed Luffy of her plans. "Luffy sweetie," the young boy stopped eating and looked at his mother with food in his mouth. "Yeah? Mommy has to go into the village again." Luffy swallowed his food. "Why? Are you gonna get more food?" "No," Star said, stifling a chuckle, "but Ms. Makino thinks your mother is sick, so she made me promise to visit the doctor." "But you're not sick, Mommy," Luffy stated matter-of-factly. Star laughed softly. "I know, but Ms. Makino is very much a worrywart when it comes to my health. If it puts her mind at ease, I don't mind going to the doctor." Though his mother seemed okay with it, Luffy did not, evident by his sad frown. "But I wanted you to play with me after lunch." Immediately, Star felt guilty seeing her son from frowning. "All right," she said with a smile. "I'll play with you for a little while, but then I will have to go to the doctor's." "Yay!" cheered Luffy happily. The boy then went back to eating, knowing his precious mother was going to play with him. When they were down, and the dishes all cleaned up, mother and son went outside to play. The boy didn't have much to play with, but a simple ball was more than enough. For the most part, they just played catch. Though for Luffy, it was more a chance to show off his fighting prowess. "Pistol punch!" Luffy shouted excitedly as he threw his punch. Unfortunately, he missed completely and it caused the boy to fall forward. The boy recovered quickly, but he looked mad. "Stupid ball," he said, glaring at the ball angrily. Star giggled seeing her son. "Try again, sweetie," she called back, supportive. Determined, Luffy got back up. "Okay," he shouted, grinning with determination. He picked up the ball and threw it back to his mother. He then got ready to throw another punch by spinning his arm. "Throw it, Mommy," he shouted, ready. "Okay," Star said with the ball in her hands. She then tossed the ball softly towards the boy, excited to see her son hit the ball. Unfortunately, her happiness would not last long. Suddenly, Star felt her entire body convulse and she began coughing hard. Her breath seemed to shorten like she had been climbing a mountain. Her vision began to blur as she watched the ball head to her son. Then, all at once, her legs gave in. She fell and landed hard on the ground, still coughing hard. Luffy didn't notice his mother as he was focused on the ball. As the ball neared him, he let forth a punch and hit the ball. "Pistol punch," shouted Luffy, overjoyed. He had finally hit the ball. Though the ball only landed just a few feet away, the boy was nonetheless happy over his accomplishment. "Mommy, did you see? Did you see? I did it, did you?" Though Luffy was excited, he soon noticed his mother on the ground. He was confused, so he walked up to her cautiously. Mommy?" He spoke confused. Star only responded with a violent cough. "Mommy!" Luffy shouted as he ran over to his mother's side. He began shaking her and he shouted out, confused. "What's wrong with you? What should I do, Mommy?" Sensing her son's dismay, Star tried replying to him but could not. Her coughing was far too violent for her to allow her to speak. Still, she tried her best. "Lu," she coughed, unable to say his name. "J, cough, cough, Makino." The little boy hardly understood what his mother said. When he heard the name, Makino, though, it immediately snapped into his mind. He took off immediately with town and Makino in mind. As he ran, his mind was filled with the worst possible thoughts. These terrible thoughts began making him shed tears as well as making him run faster to the village. It wasn't long when Luffy entered the village, and though he had yet to find Makino, he began shouting out, "Help! Help!" As Luffy repeated the same word over and over, each time more emotional and louder. People began looking out their windows and doors wondering who was shouting. As he ran further into the village, more and more people were brought out. All of them grew concerned as they noticed it was Luffy making all the noise. "What's going on? Is that Luffy? What is he shouting about? Why is he calling for help?" These questions drew in the people as they began to slowly follow behind the boy. The poor young man didn't notice the crowd forming behind him as he looked for Makino. He was beginning to panic, having yet to find her. He would find, though, unknown to him, that he was soon coming up on Party's bar. He could see the mayor, Whoop Slap, sitting on the front porch of the bar just as Makino walked out with a drink for him. Immediately, Luffy called out as loud as he could, "Help!" The boy's shout instantly grabbed the two adults' attention, and gasped seeing the crying, panicking little boy. Immediately, Makino dropped what she was doing and ran over to meet the boy. "Luffy," she called out, worried, "what's wrong?" Luffy stopped and tried to tell the woman of the problem. Unfortunately, he was too sad and confused to speak regularly. Luckily, Makino didn't need the boy to explain. Just by recognizing the agony and pain on the boy's face was enough to give the woman a good idea what may have happened. She immediately took off down the road towards where Luffy came from. The boy quickly followed. As they ran, Makino yelled back down the street to the mayor urgently. "Mayor, get the doctor." Whoop Slap was surprised, but that didn't stop him from taking action. "You lot," he shouted at one part of the crowd. "Go get the doctor and bring him to Star's home, on the double." "Why, Mayor?" asked one of the male villagers, shocked and confused. Whoop Slap growled at the crowd's ignorance. "I don't have time to explain," he shouted. "Star probably needs help now, get going." After being shouted again, the villagers didn't ask a follow-up question. Immediately, they moved to get the doctor. Though, this left another half of the crowd confused and now slowly becoming concerned. "What's happening, Mayor?" asked one of the female villagers. "There's no time," Whoop Slap replied as he began moving and heading down the street as quickly as he could. "Star needs us." That was enough to convince the crowd that something was indeed wrong. In light of this half of the crowd followed Whoop Slap, carrying him even as they were faster, down the road. All the while, he shouted at furiously for behaving so rudely to him. By later in the day, the whole Windmill village was gathered around Star and Luffy's home. They all stood around, some looking inside the windows of the home, as they waited for news of any kind. Just outside the front door, Luffy was being comforted by a few villagers the best they could. Unfortunately, forts and good intentions, the little boy was far too worried to accept any of it. He just stared at the door to his home waiting for something to happen. good or bad, he didn't know. Inside the home, Star was being tended to by the doctor from village as well as from Makino and Whoop Slap. Star herself was currently lying in bed, looking solemn and emotionless. On the other hand, Makino and Whoop Slap were looking shocked at the doctor. The doctor himself looked grim. "Doctor," Makino spoke, her voicing cracking from sadness and shock. "What you're saying, you can't mean that." "Unfortunately, it's true," the doctor said solemnly. "Miss Star is very sick, too sick to be cured, she is dying." Makino's eyes widened as the news sunk in. "No," she said in a shaky voice. "How could this have happened?" Whoop Slap said, baffled. "Her symptoms were relatively light until recently. Anyone would have mistaken it for a small cold. She must have caught this disease when she went up onto the mountain in the winter. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do." "Don't tell us that," Makino shouted in anger, surprising everyone in the room, even Star. The young woman was so full of rage, sadness, and heartbreak she couldn't contain it. Makino," Whoop Slap said in shock. The young woman, still enraged and shedding tears, pointed towards the door. "You apologize to Luffy. That boy is going to lose his mother. How do you think he'll feel knowing that he will lose his mother already in his young life? At that moment, Makino completely broke down. She began crying into her hands as the full weight of this event took its toll on her. Though she was truly concerned for Luffy, just as he was going to lose his mother, she was going to lose her dear friend and big sister figure. This was too much for her, and all too soon as well. Both the doctor and Whoop Slap pitied the poor woman. Death is never an easy thing to accept, especially when it was someone close to you. Neither men spoke to her in fear that they may just put her in an emotional worst situation. That, however, did not stop the other adult from acting. Both men saw Star walk past them, and immediately they gasped. "Star?" Whoop Slap called out in shock. Makino heard the man's shout and looked up. Before she could even react, Star had already wrapped her into a hug. Makino was completely caught off guard in shock. "Star. I'm sorry, little sis," Makino said warmly with a sad smile. "I should have listened to you sooner. I could have spared you this sadness." The young woman whimpered before she hugged the woman back. Makino continued crying, though now into the woman's shoulder. Star did nothing to stop her and provided the younger woman with comfort. Whoop Slap watched on, slightly comforted as well by the sight. Unfortunately, he understood that there was still more misfortune to come. He turned to the doctor as he asked a gruesome question: "How long does she have left?" 3 days, at most. Of course, Makino overheard this. She began clutching onto Star's clothes as she was overcome with more sadness. Though Star still attempted to comfort her friend, she herself was beginning to shake a little. Her own situation was starting to get to her as well. "Makino," Star spoke softly and almost heartbroken. Can I ask you something?" The green-haired woman looked up from Star's shoulder. She was still crying, but she had become calm enough to respond slightly. Seeing Makino's face, Star smiled. "Could you take care of Luffy for me?" she said as her voice began seeping with sadness. Before speaking again, the woman herself was beginning to shed her own tears. "He's going to need someone to look after him when I'm—" Star couldn't complete her sentence. She had become completely engulfed in her own sadness, knowing that she could no longer watch her son grow up. That she could no longer be a part of the lives of all those she cared deeply for. All of this overwhelmed her usual strong character. She began crying just as her did, letting out her sadness and despair. Makino, seeing her friend cry, began crying a fresh wave of tears. Soon, she and Star were crying together. Both men in the room remained silent. It was their way of showing sadness while not interrupting the support of two dear friends. Watching through the windows, none of the villagers needed to hear what was going on. They all saw the emotions of both women and already guessed at the worst. The news traveled fast among the crowd. "Did you see? That poor woman. That's bad news if I've ever seen one. What's going to happen to Luffy?" Unfortunately, large crowds never seem to have any sense of tact. As the news spread from person to person, their voices eventually reached Luffy's ears. Up until now, the little boy was hardly interested in the crowd, but now with everyone being so hush and whispering, he took a vague interest. "What's going on?" asked the boy to the crowd. Those closest around stopped speaking instantly. Already, they could tell that their whispers had reached the boy. Luckily, it seemed that he hadn't heard the more troubling part of their talks. Still, no one wanted to reply back to the boy in fear of letting their rumors slip. They were saved when the door from the house opened. Out walked the doctor, Whoop Slap, and Makino. Noticing this as well, Luffy turned back to his home. He began smiling, believing that all was okay. "Finally, you're all done," stated the boy innocently before asking, "Is mommy okay?" Immediately upon hearing the boy, the three adults grew solemn. Makino visibly showed much more emotion though than the two older men. Despite having finally calmed down, tears threatened to fall as she looked down at Luffy's smiling being. In an attempt to avoid the boy's gaze, she looked away while also trying to keep her tears in check. This initially confused the boy. "What are you doing, Makino?" asked Luffy confused. "Boy," Whoop Slap said as he quickly intervened, "your mother would like to see you now." Instantly, Luffy forgot about Makino's action. He looked at the mayor and smiled happily. "Okay." He then marched inside grinning from ear to ear. Once the boy was inside, the crowd began to move around the mayor. They all began asking questions. "How is Star, Mayor? Is everything all right? Is she okay?" Whoop Slap immediately became irritated by all the questions. "Quiet," he shouted, silencing the crowd. Once they were quiet, the mayor spoke again, calmly. "Everyone, the situation is not good." As Mayor Whoop Slap explained the situation to the village, Luffy was already inside his home. He could not hear anything going outside, nor did he really care. His complete focus was on his mother, lying in bed. In seeing her, his first instinct was to run up to the bed, jump, and land with a splash that would make both him and his mother laugh. While he got the running part down, he stopped before he could jump as he saw his mother closer. Though he could see her smiling, he could see that there was something off about her this time. While Luffy stood at her bedside slightly dazed, Star finally looked at her son. While she still kept her smile, there was obvious hints of sadness being shown with it. She didn't want to let on to her condition yet. "Hello, sweetie." "Hi, mommy." Luffy replied back without his usual excited energy. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Star asked worried. "I don't know," the boy replied back confused. This made Star frown. Even if she didn't tell him, her son had an uncanny ability to read the emotions of the room, even if he didn't understand what those emotions were. She didn't want her son to be like this, so she had an idea. "Luffy," she said, putting on a genuine smile, "how about I tell you your favorite story?" Luffy gasped in surprise. "Really?" he said with excitement. Star nodded before she patted the spot next to her on the bed. Immediately, the boy crawled onto the bed and took up the spot. While sitting in his spot, Luffy was bouncing up and down excitedly. Not wanting to keep her son waiting, SL the story. So, once upon a time, there was a pirate named Gold Roger. So, Star told the story of the Pirate King and his grand adventures to Luffy. This of course wasn't the first time she had told this story to her son. Star had probably told this story countless times throughout the young boy's life. It was by far his most favorite bedtime story and a constant source of his dreams and admiration. He loved all the adventures that the Pirate King went on, not knowing that most of them were made up by Star through rumor and hearsay. She always did her best to inspire the boy's imagination. This time was no different, and probably even more important now than ever before. And as he stood before all the people of the world about to be executed, he grinned proudly. Star said as she continued to tell the story of the Pirate King to her son. Then, a bystander shouted out to the man, "Hey, Pirate King! Where did you hide your treasure?" And the Pirate King responded back, his last words resonating within the hearts of all those who wished for adventure. "You want my treasure? You can have it. I left everything I gathered together in one place. Now you just have to find it?" "Yeah," shouted Luffy, completely pumped up and excited. Star laughed before continuing the story. Then, the Pirate King was executed and the crowd roared with excitement. The idea of a grand treasure hidden by the Pirate King swelled the hearts and dreams of many. And soon, many people began setting out on their own adventures to find the Pirate King's treasure, One Piece. Thus, the Great Pirate Age had begun. "Yeah, I'm gonna find it," Luffy shouted, suddenly even more excited as he stood up on the bed. "I'm gonna find the One Piece and become king of the pirates." The woman beamed brightly as she looked at her son, witnessing his enthusiasm. It was completely heartwarming seeing her son have such a fantastic goal. It didn't matter to Star if he was going to become a pirate. She just cared that her son was happy. Which made it all the more difficult as she realized again that her time was limited. Luffy turned to see his mother. He flashed her a bright grin about to speak, but could not when he saw her. "Mommy," he spoke confused, "why are you crying?" Star looked at her son surprised before she placed her hand on her cheek. She felt the tears on her cheek, and realized that she was breaking again. "Oh," she said attempting to feign surprise, I. "Mommy," Luffy said again staring at her with wide eyes, "is something wrong?" It was then after hearing Luffy that Star knew that her attempt to hide her condition had failed. Though she knew he had no idea of it, she could tell that he was on to her. It was time to tell him. "Luffy, there is something wrong with Mommy." "Something wrong with Mommy?" Luffy repeated confused, tilting his head. "Yes," Star said lowly, trying her best to keep her emotions in check again. "Mommy is sick, very sick." "But didn't the doctor help you?" Star shook her head slowly. "He couldn't this time." She then went quiet as she tried to figure a way to say the next part as lightly as possible. She doubted she could. There is no easy way to tell someone you're dying. Luffy, finally, Star decided that there was no way to make this sentence light. She looked Luffy straight into his eyes, trying to be as serious as possible. Then, like a sticky band-aid, she told him. "I'm dying." What?" said Luffy shocked. "I'm dying, Luffy," Star said again as she began to emotionally break. "I'm not going to be around anymore to take care of you." "But," Luffy said as his eyes began watering up, "but what about watching me become the Pirate King?" Star closed her eyes as tears threatened to fall. She shut her mouth tight, not wanting to speak. In her current state, the pain in her throat would cause her voice to crack due to her sadness and grief. She didn't want to falter like that in front of her son. "But," Luffy said, continuing on despite his own sadness slowly overcoming him, "you'll be there for my birthday, right?" Some noise escaped from Star, but she quickly covered her mouth with her hand. Though her eyes were still closed, tears had begun leaking through. She wouldn't last much longer. Neither would Luffy. With his mother remaining silent, the boy wasn't faring emotionally well either. The boy was already letting his tears flow out like waterfalls. His expression showed both fear and sadness, staring at his mother. Finally, he shouted out in a cry of desperation, "Mommy." Hearing Luffy, Star couldn't hold it in. In an instant, she reached out and engulfed her son in a hug. She let out a cry as she held her son close, letting her tears flow out. All the while, she kept repeating over and over in sorrow, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Luffy couldn't handle it any longer. He suddenly jerked out of his mother's hold, much to her surprise. Incidentally, his sudden jerking motion had also caused him to fall off the bed. "Luffy," Star called out while also extending her hand and arm out. Though she was still shedding tears, she was now more concerned for her son's safety than sad. Ever resilient, Luffy recovered quickly. While he saw his mother's hand extended offer him help, just seeing her and being reminded of her dire condition made the boy's emotions betray his usual instinct. He instead moved away from his mother and eventually take off running out the house. "Luffy," Star shouted out again. She was about to go after him, but suddenly she had another coughing fit that stopped. Outside, the villagers had been surprised when they saw Luffy come running out. It was even more concerning seeing the boy crying and running off. "Luffy," said one of the male villagers, confused. "Where's he going?" Still around, Makino heard the villager and then quickly turned to find the boy. "Luffy," she shouted worriedly. "Boy!" shouted Whoop Slap, slightly angered. "Oi, Mayor!" shouted another male villager closer to the Star's home. "Star's coughing really badly." "Damn it!" Whoop Slap said, growling slightly, "take care of Star first." Immediately, the doctor and a few male villagers rushed inside the home, while the crowd's focus was back on the home and the woman inside. Only Makino seemed to keep her attention on the boy fleeing towards the village. She quickly took off running to follow the boy. Whoop Slap took notice of this, but did nothing. He knew that the situation with Luffy was in good hands. Seeing how both situations were being handled, Whoop Slap began walking back into town, much to the curiosity of some villagers. "Mayor, where are you going?" Whoop Slap responded solemnly, "I need to make a call." It had taken her a few minutes, but Makino eventually caught up with Luffy. He had taken her through the village and then along the coastline. She eventually found him on the ledge extended out over the ocean. Even from a distance, she could see the state the boy was in. He was curled up and sitting facing towards the ocean despite not actually looking at it. The boy's head was set into his arms, obviously hiding his sadness and tears. As she slowly and cautiously approached the boy, she soon could hear his muffled cries and sniffles. She was also beginning to hear a few things from him. "Don't go, please." Makino stopped and frowned in sadness. She understood that Luffy wasn't talking about her. She doubted he even realized she was here. Despite it, she wasn't going to leave the boy alone. She took up a spot next to the boy and sat down next to him. Silently, she wrapped Luffy in a side hug, offering both comfort and also sharing in his grief. Star had asked her to take care of her son, and by whatever deity, she would do so the best she could. "Huh? Hello?" Back in the village, Whoop Slap sat in his house at the table with a transponder snail nearby. The gruff voice from earlier came from the snail. The snail, with its psychic link to its partner somewhere in the world, it relayed the voice and the facial expression of the one on the other side. At that, an expression of confusion through looking as gruff the man's voice on the other side. Hearing the voice, Whoop Slap responded back through the receiver. "Garp, it's me, Whoop Slap." "Huh? Whoop Slap?" The voice responded back as well as showing an expression of confusion. "What's the meaning of this? When do you make important calls to me?" "Garp," Whoop Slap said, looking grim. "I have bad news to tell about Star." "What did she do this time?" Garp responded with the snail showing his annoyance. "She didn't beat up another marine, did she?" "No, Garp," Whoop Slap responded. "This is much more serious." The snail's expression began look concerned. Star is dying." 3 days later, Monkey D. Star passed away peacefully. Garp had arrived later that same day. Too late to say his own goodbyes to her personally. On the next day, a funeral was prepared for her. It was raining on this day, but no one cared. To them, it was as if the heavens themselves were crying for the loss of a bright star. Appropriate as there was barely a dry eye among the crowd. Even with the rain pouring like cats and dogs, the whole village turned out to say their last goodbyes to the woman. They all stood around Star's home as they each entered and paid their respects to the woman's surviving family. Makino, Whoop Slap, and Garp stood with Luffy as these people came by him. The poor boy looked tired. He probably had the worst 3 days of his life before this day. He just stood before everyone, emotionless and unfeeling. Once everyone had paid their respects, it was time to bring Star to her final resting place. Though a group of village men were prepared to carry the casket, Garp took the whole burden upon himself. "It's the least I can do," was his response when asked. No one argued with him and allowed him to carry the coffin solo. Everyone followed Garp in procession as they headed to the cemetery, family and close friends right behind him. The walk was long, especially in the rain, but they soon reached the plot of land where Star would be buried. With everyone giving one last goodbye, Star and her casket were covered with earth and buried. A grave marker was set up soon after. It read, "In loving memory of Monkey D. Star, caring mother, loving wife, and dear friend." After many more minutes of silence, the crowd of people began making their way back to the village, continuing so in silence. By the minute, the crowd got smaller and smaller until all that was left was those closest to Star. Even in the rain, they stayed in their spots as long as they could bear. Eventually though, it was their time to leave. Whoop Slap and Makino took Luffy back to the village as it soon became clear that the boy was hungry, even if he didn't want to admit it. All who was left at the grave was Garp, who had soon taken to seating on the wet ground. Throughout the whole ceremony, he had remained stoic, never letting a single tear flow. Or maybe they were flowing, but with the rainwater flowing down his face it was impossible to tell. It was still clear though that he was sad. As he sat before his daughter-in-law's grave, he began recalling memories of the girl that he held precious. "You're pretty tough, girl," a young Garp said as he sat at a bar with a child Star sitting next to him. She was covered in scrapes and bruises, but otherwise, she looked fine as she drank her juice. The young Garp smiled as he then suggested to the girl, "You could make a fine marine one day." "I could?" the small girl questioned with interest. "Maybe I will then." Skip ahead now a few years later, Star now was a teenager, and a pretty defiant one at that. She stood before Garp, looking a little older now, who looked ripe with anger. "What?" he shouted in anger and annoyance. "What do you mean you don't want to be a Marine anymore?" "Shut up, you old Marine bastard," Star replied, annoyed and irritating. "If I leave, who is gonna protect this village from attack? Certainly not you." Garp growled with annoyance and was about to teach the girl some manners. He stopped, however, as he caught sight of Makino, as a child, standing behind her. She looked to be admiring her greatly for whatever reason. Immediately, Garp's anger dissipated and he just sighed wryly. "Fine," he said, sounding almost defeated, "do whatever you want. Probably not a bad idea for this village actually." "Hey!" Garp now watched with interest as his son, Dragon, stood in the streets of Windmill Village. Opposite him was Star, who looked ready to fight him. He watched as Star shouted, "You gonna fight me, Marine boy?" Dragon looked at the girl annoyed. "I am not a Marine, girl." "Doesn't matter." Star replied with an arrogant grin. "You're Garp's son, which means you must be strong, right? Or are you gonna run to your daddy for protection?" Garp let out a loud laugh. Though he knew his son would never do such an unmanly act, he loved seeing Star egg his son on. He then watched as his son begrudgingly took the bait and readied to fight Star. Garp truly wondered if Star had the strength to fight his son, who had grown pretty fearsome looking. It was a fight worth seeing. What? A few years later, Garp returned to the village for another vacation and to be shocked with some surprising news. Dragon married you. Star, now a young woman, blushed and smiled, almost looking embarrassed. Yes, she said gently. And you're pregnant? Garp shouted further as he looked down at the woman's small swollen belly. The young woman smiled even brighter, proudly, as she softly placed her hands on her stomach and rubbed it lovingly. Again, she responded with the same answer in the same manner. Yes. Garp couldn't believe it. In just a few short years, Star had gone from a loud rebel rouser to a gentle woman, wife, and mother. Last he had seen of them, they were getting along like cats and dogs. Never would he had guessed his son would marry and have a child with the loud and overconfident protector of Windmill Village. Nor would he had expected those things to change the girl so much. What more could go unexpected for him? Bang! Apparently, the birth of his grandson was more than enough. After some months of duty, Garp returned to see the birth of his grandchild. Though a little late, he got to see him, which surprising made him faint much to everyone's surprise. Garp, Mr. Garp. Whoop Slap and Teen Makino were in the room when they witnessed the Marine Vice Admiral faint at the sight of his grandson. Neither one of them expected the man to pass out like that. All the while, Star laughed at her father-in-law's situation. She couldn't have expected this to happen, but it was a joyous sight. In her hands, the baby monkey D. Luffy smiled brightly despite not understanding what was going on. Garp smiled as he remembered each of these memories of Star fondly. He couldn't have asked for a finer spouse for his son. If only he could not say the same about said son. When the wind picked up suddenly, Garp hardly took any concern by it. He remained in his spot, his smile now gone, and stared at Gravemarker silently. The wind soon died down, and there was a new sound of someone approaching him. Still, Garp didn't look back. Soon, a figure joined his side and still, the old Marine didn't look at him. "You're too late, son," Garp said to the man, solemnly. The old Vice Admiral paused a moment as the man, Monkey D. Dragon, suddenly fell to his knees and hands, not to Garp's surprise. The old man could hear the sobs coming from his regret and grief obvious, but he did not pity him. How would he when he was also in the same boat? Garp soon put his hand up to his face as his own sadness broke his stoic expression. The death of his daughter-in-law, the grief of his son, and the emotionlessness of his grandson was all too much to bear for one old man. We were both too late.